Well, hello, and thank you for joining me at this very, very late notice slow chat here on a Tuesday night. Not normally doing slow chats on Tuesday nights. Normally it's reserved for a Thursday night. So let me explain. Well, firstly, if you're new to slow chats, if this is not a format that you've ever seen before, something's popped up in your news feed, you're on a Tuesday night, you've thought, I'll have a look at what this is. Let me explain. A slow chat is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It's slow. And it's a chat. We're going to talk tonight about something that you, my wonderful subscribers, have been asking for in a huge numbers. So if you're not aware, I've recently activated for the first time my email list. I've been accepting people's email addresses for, 5 or 6 years. I've literally never sent an email. And Sally is saying good evening to all. Good evening to you, Sally. So because I had never sent out an email, I've recently activated the list, and this is, we're getting used to each other. Some of you who signed up years ago are getting in touch with me saying, who are you? I don't remember. Obviously you saw something of mine back then, you signed up and you've forgotten. Other people are saying, hey, I thought you'd actually disappeared. I've had a few people say they just assumed that I wasn't doing anything anymore. And so we've been having some good conversations, and I've literally had over 150 emails in the last couple of days since I sent out the very first email to that list of people. So if you're not on my emailing list and you'd like to be, it's a great way to stay in touch if I do get kicked off Facebook. I'm pretty careful. I'm probably more careful than I need to be honest. I'm pretty risk averse. I'm literally on my last warning on Facebook. I've had heaps of warnings over the last year. So I am now being super duper careful, probably more careful than I need to be. But just in case, if you do want to be on my email list, go to topherfield.net. That is my blog, topherfield.net. On the right-hand side of your screen, you'll find a spot there where you can chuck in your email address, and we can keep in touch. Even if I get kicked off Facebook, I'll be able to stay in touch with you that way. So through your feedback, I asked in my email, I said, listen, what can I do for you? What is it that you would really love to hear from me that would help you the most? And I've had a bunch of different things, so like lots of different things, and some things are going to take some time. I need to interview other people for some of these subjects, or I need to do some research for some of the subjects. But there's one in particular that I think I can pretty much help with straight away, and that's this issue of how do you go to a protest without ending up getting arrested, without ending up getting beaten to a pulp, without getting shot, as we saw with the most recent protest. And how do you avoid that? There's a lot of people who are with us in spirit. They want to be a part of what's happening, but you're a bit apprehensive, and I can understand that. That's obviously why the police use the tactics that they use. They're trying to intimidate you, and of course that works. It works. Intimidation works. So that's what I'm going to talk about today, and I'm going to go through a couple of key topics here. I'm going to talk about your clothing, what you wear, your props, what you bring with you, your demeanor, how you behave, your positioning within the crowd, your tactics, as in what the crowd ought to do. The crowd makes decisions sort of as a hive. There's no single person making decisions. So the more people that can make good decisions and encourage the crowd to join them in those decisions, the better. As well as optics, thinking about how things look to others who may not be on your side, rather than just thinking about how things look to you. And then finally, messaging. So that's kind of the topic for tonight. And to be honest, it's not a massive area. I'm not going to be talking for a long time about that. So it's kind of one of those nights where I'm probably going to blast through what I've got to say fairly quickly, and then I can get onto some Q&A. And you can see that I've got people's comments coming up down here. I'm doing that myself, so if I look slightly distracted, if I'm looking away from the screen, it's because I'm reading comments and putting them up. And it's an opportunity tonight, I think, for me to do a bit of a Q&A. So a lot of people have joined already, so I'm just going to hurry up. So for those of you not familiar with the slow chat format, this is one of the ways that I decompress and I relax, is with a nice cigar. Some people object to that, which really mystifies me. I'm like, you're jumping on my slow chats and then you're objecting to the cigar. Okay, good for you. This is how I relax. If you can tolerate me relaxing in my own way, then great, stick around. If you can't, go do something else. Like, honestly, there's lots of things you could be doing. You don't have to be here. But this is how I relax. This is how I gather my thoughts. This is how I decompress. And God knows there is a lot to decompress from at the moment. So I'm going to enjoy myself tonight. I have some Balvenie Double Wood 12 whiskey. to enjoy, in moderation, of course. And I have a Rocky Patel Age Limited Rare Second Edition Robusto to enjoy as my cigar tonight. So I'm going to get that lit up. It's going to take a minute or two, and then we will get stuck into tonight's topic: how to survive a protest. How do you get into the city? How do you get out again? What should you be thinking about? Where should you be positioned in the crowd? All that stuff, all these little decisions that you make along the way. And look, it's not hard, it's not complicated, but I do get that for people who've never been there, if you've never been to a big protest, if you've never been to a protest where, the police are saying it's illegal, you're not allowed to protest. Of course, it's not fucking illegal. What a joke. The very idea that protest against the government is illegal is an absolute anathema to everything that so-called liberal democracy, so-called Western culture ought to be standing for. But if you've never been to a protest where the police are taking that attitude, rightly or wrongly, newsflash, wrongly, then it's intimidating. I get it. It can look really kind of scary, and especially if you're watching the news and you're seeing the helicopter footage, and the news, they're just showing you the most dramatic bits, right? They're showing you this incredibly narrow view of the most confrontational moments at the most confrontational physical locations. And if you weren't there in that moment, then that wasn't your experience at all. You can have a completely different experience of a protest based on where you position yourself and when. Okay, so my cigar wrapper is trying to unravel on me already. All right. If this was about health, Dictator Dan would have already taken your cigars and alcohol already. I think Dictator Dan knows that if he tries to take alcohol, there will be riots in the streets. And if he tries to take cigars, there won't be as many people angry, but boy, will they be angry. Only the Americans put E in whiskey. That's true. And I said whiskey, I didn't spell it. This is a Scotch, and it's not one of my favorites, to be honest. It's not the most amazing Scotch, the Balvenie Doublewood 12, but it pairs really well with this particular cigar. The complement of these two together is actually really, really good. All right, let's get stuck in. So let's fast forward another month or so. You see somewhere, who knows where it would be, a post about another protest coming up. And you want to come along, but you're worried, you're concerned, or you have other people in your life that are concerned about you, and they're encouraging you not to go because they've seen the violence, they've seen what goes on. Let's talk about the logistics, the physical logistics of a protest from the point of view of you as an individual, traveling in, participating, and then traveling home again. Now, of course, I'm not talking about any illegal protests here. No, I would never encourage you to do that. I'm just talking about protests in general. Right? I'm just talking any old protest that you might happen to decide that you want to be a part of. How do you do that in a way that doesn't get you into too much trouble and allows you to actually get home safe and hug your loved ones? Now, I've been to a bunch of protests, as I'm sure most of you know, and I have yet to be fined at a protest. They've twice tried to find me after a protest because obviously I'm very high profile. I'm posting my own videos out there saying, hey, I was at the protest. So they come after me afterwards. The first one, they tried to find me. I'll talk about fines for a second, and then we'll get to the specific logistics. They tried to find me after I spoke at the Anzac Day protest in 2020. That one. And they sent me the fine in the mail afterwards. I then nominated to have it go to court. They took absolutely ages, and eventually they sent me a letter basically saying, we're withdrawing the fine. Right? So that went nowhere. Never even made it to court. I have another fine from not the most recent protest, but the one before that, when I put up a couple of live videos when the police showed up on my door to try and intimidate me. They showed up on the Friday before the protest to try and intimidate me out of going. Then they showed up on the Monday after the protest to tell me they were going to send me a fine in the mail. Like, make sense of that. Yeah, Francesca's there. Yeah, okay. Of course she is. Fran is my biggest fan. And does a really good job of making sure the metrics get really, really boosted because she just posts all this trolling crap. Feed the trolls, by the way. I've learned this. I used to say, don't feed the trolls. Feed the trolls because the comment count goes through the roof, and then all of a sudden, everyone really just gets fed. Like, my content gets pushed out to all these extra people. So those of you that can see Fran, I think she's a coward. I can't see her comments, which tells me that she's probably blocked me, even though she's posting on my page. So congratulations, Fran, you're a coward. But if you're seeing Francesca Ricky's comments, then feel free to give her a what for, because the more she comments back, the better it is for the metrics, and we all get to have a bit of fun. Anyway, on the fines. So the first fine that I got, they dismissed. They wouldn't let it go to court. Now, if you've been watching my videos recently, you would have seen a video that I posted. It was made by somebody else, and I posted it onto my page, where they were actually recording the audio as police discussed charging people, knowing full well that the charges wouldn't go to court. All right, they'd appeal it, it'd get nominated to go to court, and then they'd get withdrawn. And they say that in the video. But they were charging people for the purpose of applying bail conditions. So they're actually misusing their powers. They're misusing their the trust that's been given to them, the power that they have to charge people with crimes. They're misusing that for political purposes to then apply bail conditions and try and shut people up. So that's a really interesting admission that they've made about how they're tactically playing this. So my first charge, they withdrew, obviously. My second charge is ongoing. So they tried to intimidate me. They showed up at the door to say, hey, we're going to send you something in the mail. Yeah, okay, great. Send it to me in the mail. Like, since when did Australia Post need an announcer, a police officer showing up the door to announce that Australia Post were going to deliver a letter? Clearly just a really limp wrist that attempted at intimidation, which I think all of you know me well enough to know that that's going to work really spectacularly well on me. And sure enough, a few days later, it did show up in the mail. I've since sent that back and said, take me to court. I'll go to court. Right now, so my expectation is that they're going to withdraw that as well. My understanding of the current political landscape is that they are not pursuing these fines. They're absolutely terrified of what might happen if they did actually go through with taking one of these to court from someone or against someone who has competent legal representation. So my expectation is it's going to get thrown out. They're going to withdraw that very, very quickly. Not very, very quickly. It'll take months to happen, but they're certainly never going to let it go to court. If it does go to court, well, then I'll be getting in touch with you guys to try and get the financial support that I need. I know the legal team that I want to use, but obviously they cost money. So we'll cross that bridge when we get there. Okay. For now, my expectation is they're going to withdraw the fine. But understand, when it comes to protests and yourself, your worst case scenario, unless you're an idiot, is to come away with a piece of paper in your hand that says you've been a very naughty person and you owe them money. A fine in your hand is your worst case scenario, unless you do something pretty silly and let yourself at a minimum be in the really wrong place at the wrong time, or worse yet, you're actually an agitator who then gets in their faces and kind of provokes a reaction. If that's you, and if that's your personality, if you're the kind of person that's going to do that, maybe just stay away. Maybe just stay home, okay? But if you're the kind of person who's not going to get in their faces and actually provoke a reaction, the truth is your worst case scenario is not being arrested and dragged off in the back of a paddy wagon and locked away and whatever else. Your worst case scenario is you're going to get grabbed, you're going to get walked over to a table with some bored, shitless police officer who's going to be sitting there. Yeah, what's your name? Yeah, what's your details? Blah, blah, blah. Here's your piece of paper. Now piss off, right? And then you walk away with a piece of paper in your hand. That's your worst case scenario. You can then decide what you want to do with that piece of paper, whether you want to fight it. I don't recommend ignoring it. That would be the one thing I would not do. There are some people who are like, oh, just chuck them in the bin. Yeah, look, you might get away with that, but the system is pretty good at dealing with people that just ignore them. Sorry, I just realized I've had that sitting over there the whole time. In fact, even worse than that, it's not even plugged in. Hey, how about I actually use the equipment that I've got sitting here? What a good idea. Can you just let me know, did that change? Did the audio change? Can you hear me a little bit better now than you could before? Shazza, I did see what they did to Matt. Absolute disgrace. Matt Lawson is his last name. You'll find him on Telegram. So someone said, which Matt? Matt Lawson, you'll find him on Telegram. He does some really good stuff. Yeah, everyone's saying it's better, it's clearer. Thank you, guys. Fantastic. Echo is gone. So thanks for that feedback. Wow. Okay, a lot of comments just suddenly dropped in. Got a proud not citizens yet? Scared it? Yeah. Okay. Okay, so this is one category of person that I might suggest, just be careful, follow all. If you want to come to a protest, you're not a citizen yet, or you have other kind of stuff in front of the courts or other issues going on in your life, follow all of the advice that I'm going to give you in this video, and you should be pretty well okay. Not Matt Wong, Matt Lawson. He got shot by the police with a non-lethal round. At a minimum, a beanbag, possibly a rubber bullet. There's still confusion around exactly the projectile that was used. There is a photograph floating around showing a large rubber projectile. There are some people disputing that came from this protest, blah, blah, blah. There's always noise. Like there's always people wanting to argue the toss every single direction. So I don't know exactly what ammunition was used, but he was shot multiple times with a minimum paintball and at least a beanbag, if not a rubber bullet. Some pretty significant bruising. And the irony is, like, Matt Lawson is not an agitator. He is not an idiot. He's literally got video of him going to the police and helping them in other situations at the protest. And he was going to the police to try and say, hey, there's kids in the crowd. He saw them with the paintball guns. He saw them with the weapons. And he was like, hey, guys, maybe don't do that because there's kids back here. And they shot him. So absolutely absurd that they did what they did to him. Lyle makes a good point. Don't throw bottles. Don't throw bottles. Guys, we'll get to the tactics and we'll get to what some of the stuff that happened at the last protest. I get it. Everyone's getting angrier. It's getting more, the atmosphere is changing at the protests. And I do understand that. It's human nature, but there's some tactical stuff that we did wrong. Okay, let me get to the focus of today. The focus of today is all about what do you do as an individual, assuming you're coming along to the protests for the purpose of adding your voice and being there, but not getting arrested, not getting into trouble, certainly not getting beaten up by the cops. So let's talk first and foremost about the concept of a grey man, obviously grey woman as well, but I'm going to talk about a grey man. The idea of being a grey man, the idea of not standing out. When the police are there, and whether they're on the sidelines or whether there's a lineup, a confrontation happening or what have you, they are looking, and they're looking for the people that stand out. They're looking for the people that appear dangerous or appear risky. And so if you are someone who is there to avoid trouble, as I always am, I'm not interested in physical confrontations. If you're there to avoid trouble, you don't want to be someone that stands out. And the best way to think of it is dress and then look in the mirror and go, are you distinctive enough that there is an easy 5-second way to describe you that someone next to you would then go, I know exactly who you're talking about. Okay. So if you've got lots of tattoos, probably best to try and cover them up. All right. Don't have all your tats showing, because that's an easy distinctive thing for someone to describe. Maybe don't be wearing super distinctive clothing. Maybe just go for the middle of the road wardrobe, sort of gray, relatively nondescript sort of clothing. That's going to be a little bit hard for anyone to latch onto something and be able to describe you in 2 seconds flat and have the person next to them know exactly who out of the whole crowd they're actually talking about. For example, I love to wear my Good People Break Bad Laws t-shirt. I've always got a zip-up jacket, and I wear that zip-up jacket until I'm actually in the crowd. So as I'm trying to make my way in and make my way back out again, that jacket's zipped up and the slogan is not visible. If you want to bring signs with you and that sort of stuff, which I really appreciate the people that do that, that does add to your risk a little bit. It makes it a little bit harder to kind of hide all that stuff. Backpacks are an okay option. But the funny thing is, you think about someone, okay, you see, I don't know, let's say a 20-something-year-old male walking down the street with a hoodie and jeans and sneakers and a backpack, and you're a police officer looking out for people who might be going to cause trouble, and you go, ooh, that person there, I wonder what he's got in the backpack, right? You see the exact same person dressed the exact same way, and they've got like one of those old grandma shopping trolleys, those little 4-wheeled things with like the handle and stuff that just trundles along the ground behind them. The thought process is weirdly different, right? The backpack seems more threatening, more dangerous, like it might have something more dangerous in it than something as not nondescript. It actually does make you stand out a little bit more having that little hand trolley, but it's a less threatening thing to actually have. So my advice to you would be, if you are transporting things in and out of a protest, have a really good think about how you're transporting them, and how do you do that in a way that is not going to think about what a rabble-rouser would look like. Think about what that person would look like. What are the police looking for? What are they afraid of seeing? And think about how you can move your clothing, your wardrobe, your choices away from that stereotype and away from looking like that. And immediately you'll start to blend into the background. You'll start to become a bit of a gray man. You're just part of the landscape. You're not the droid that they're looking for, so to speak. Obviously, comfortable clothing is important because anyone that's been to any of the protests knows we can cover a lot of ground in a protest. Getting moving and keeping moving is a really important part of the tactics. And I'll talk more about the tactics a little bit later on. But keeping moving is a really important tactic for the protests. And that means you're going to cover a lot of ground. So comfortable footwear is pretty important. But you can go kind of one of two ways. I would suggest really going either towards looking like you're wearing athleisure wear, like the tights and the sports tops, and you're out for a walk, you're out for your exercise, right? Because exercise is a legitimate reason to leave home. So you could go for that kind of stereotype. Or the other way to go, which I've seen people do very successfully, is to just be slightly better dressed. Not like tuxedo and evening gown kind of stuff, but just be that little bit more sharply dressed. Look like you're a bit more sophisticated. And it's funny, the police's eyes will kind of gloss over you. You're not the person they're looking for. They're looking for the troublemaker, the rabble rouser, and somehow having a nice trench coat and maybe jeans pants and maybe black shoes if they're comfortable suddenly make you not that person. You're not the person that they're looking for anymore. So that would be my main focus on clothing. Don't wear the stuff that in your head, if you think about a rabble rouser, you think about that guy that you see in the photograph having a screaming match with a cop, getting up in their face. What's that person wearing? And maybe you don't wear that, right? Maybe you steer clear of that sort of stuff. I would head towards the athletics end of the scale or the slightly better dressed end of the scale and stay away from kind of slobby streetwear kind of stuff, because that's what I think the stereotype says that troublemakers are going to be wearing. So that's my main thing on clothing. As you're moving towards the location and away from the location of the protest itself, blending in is really important. Not blending in with the crowd that were at the protest, blending in with all of the other people that were not at the protest, the people that are just going to do a little bit of shopping, the people that are just doing some exercise, the people that are just getting some coffee. Blending in with those people is far more important than blending in with the crowd at the protest, right? Because your transit in and your transit out are actually your kind of most critical moments. And we'll talk a bit more about that when it comes to tactics a little bit later on. So think about blending in, not just from the point of view of blending in with the crowd at the protest, blend in with the people who are not coming to the protest, but are also in the area where the protest is being held. That's what you need to be thinking about when it comes to clothes. Now, closely related to clothing, you've also got props. Now, props, of course, is a term used in theater or used in television and what have you, to talk about the things that you might hold in your hand or move around or what have you. A water bottle is a good prop. I would suggest having a prop of some sort, right? My go-to is a takeaway coffee cup, right? I have a mask on, sunglasses on, jacket on, takeaway coffee cup in my hand, right? And at that point, I'm practically invisible. To the cop who's looking for the troublemaker, I'm practically invisible. If I had nothing in my hands, I actually become slightly more noticeable, right? The coffee cup gives me context. I've gone out for a walk, I've bought a coffee, and I'm probably back on my way home now. All of a sudden, there's context to understand who I am and what I'm doing. So, bang, coffee cup in my hand, one of my favorites. It's a Woolworths bag. You know those branded bags that you pay money for, 15 cents or whatever, from Woolies or from Coles or what have you. You're walking along with one of those in your hand, even if it's empty, it's just scrunched up in your hand. You're on your way to the supermarket, okay? If it's not empty, there's a few things in it. You're on your way back from the supermarket. Suddenly there's context. And the officer's eyes are just going to glaze straight over you, right? They understand who you are and why you're there. Now they're looking for the other person, right? So props can actually be a really useful thing to be able to have with you that can just add that layer. If you're dressed in a way that doesn't say very much about you or gives you context, like I'm out exercising, or, I'm a bit wealthier, I'm a bit of a better dressed person, I'm not one of those rabble rousers, and then you add a prop on top of that. My experience, so I'll give you an anecdote, and this is only an anecdote, like sample size of one. What does it mean? Who knows? You make up your own mind. But I was scouting before the last protest. I got into the city 2 hours before the protest started. And I was scouting the city. trying to understand what the police were doing, where they were set up, what they were prepared for, what they would want from us. It's understand what they want and then don't do it. Right, that's a critical truth of any tactical situation, which again we'll get to a little bit later on. So I was there busy doing that, having a bit of a look around, figuring out where they were, trying to sort of make my way in, and then getting stopped because there were police on every corner, and then coming back out again and finding another way in and getting stopped. And so now when I say getting stopped, not literally getting stopped by the cops, getting stopped because I saw them long before they saw me. In fact, they never saw me. But at one particular moment, I was walking through a particular park, making my way from one potential entry point to another potential entry point, figuring out the lie of the land. And I discovered, and it was just one of those unfortunate moments where they weren't visible to me when I entered the park. I looked, I paid good attention. I entered the park, I started down this pathway, and bang, cops coming out of actually, it was initially cops coming over a little crest towards me on sort of the angled path that I was on. And I was able to, there was an intersection that I was going to get to before they were going to get to. I was like, okay, I'll turn right at that point. Okay, and I'll just look like I'm walking around the park. Well, as I approached that intersection and moved past some bushes and stuff, there's these other cops coming down the other path. I'm like, oh no. So I literally just had to, with my mask on, my sunnies on, my coffee mug in my hand, I literally just had to walk straight past the cops walking the other way. Obviously, they were on alert. They knew there was a protest planned, etc. But they're not on high alert. They're not like, you know, forensically analyzing every single person. And if you just don't stand out, if you just are that gray man, they don't really notice you. So that's so your clothing, your choice of clothing, your choice of props, but then also your choice of demeanor, how you are behaving in that space. Okay. If you're hyper vigilant, looking over your shoulder all the time, you're going to stand out. If you're nervous, you're going to stand out. If you're moving really fast, you're going to stand out. Moving at a normal pace, okay, anywhere from a quick walk because I'm exercising to a casual walk because I'm just soaking up a bit of sunshine and getting a little bit of exercise, and I've got my coffee with me. Somewhere in that range is great. Giving the cops context with your demeanor. If your demeanor stands out, then you stand out. And so if you've gone for more that athleisure wear kind of look, then behave in a more athleisure wear kind of way. If you've got more of a street kind of look or a smart street kind of look, behave in that way. So I just walked along like I was a guy who'd gone and bought a coffee, and I had the coffee cup in my hand, and I was walking through the park probably on my way home. That's just how I behaved. And I just walked straight past them, and they never even batted an eyelid, never thought twice about who I was or why I might have been there. So your demeanor plays a huge part of it in terms of getting in and out. We'll talk about demeanor in the protest when we get to tactics and optics a little bit later on. But for now, for the purposes of getting in and out, so long as your demeanor is within the range of normal demeanor and fits with your wardrobe and fits with your props, then you're basically invisible at that point. Once you have those three, your wardrobe, your props, and your demeanor all get all align with each other. None of them stand out from each other. Then at that point, you're basically invisible, and you don't really have to think too much deeper than that in terms of getting in and out. Now, once you're in and the protest kicks off, and we'll talk about how protests kick off when I get to tactics, that's going to be a big section. But once the protest is kicked off and there's a crowd to be a part of, that's where things get really, really simple, but paying attention becomes really, really important. The simple fact is, if you're in the middle of the crowd, if you're at least, let's say, 5 people deep from the edge of the crowd, you've got pretty much nothing to worry about. Okay? You really don't. Once there's thousands and thousands of people, the police are not there to go like driving a wedge in, like, you know, sure, they've got mounted police. They're not going to ride in like cavalry with lancers mowing you all down, right? Once you're a few layers deep inside that crowd, you've really got nothing to worry about. Okay. And there are always people who are willing to be on the edge, right? You've got your own psychology, your own personality, your own risk profile of how much risk you're willing to take. Other people have theirs. And if you're one of those people that hasn't come to a protest yet because you're fearful or you're worried about what might happen, well, trust me, there are other people there that are a bit less worried than you. They've been a few times. They're a bit more comfortable with the environment. Hey, yeah, no, I know, yeah. They're a bit more comfortable with that environment, and they're willing to be on the edge. So you don't have to be, right? You can be a few people deep, whether that's from the side, from the front, from the back. I would just advise you to make sure you stay inside that crowd. If you're worried, And especially, if you're someone who's maybe a little bit more elderly or for whatever reason you can't move particularly quickly, it's on you to then just be vigilant about where you are and make sure when the crowd moves, you start moving with it and you don't end up on the edge. You don't end up being separated at any point in time. That's the number one thing in terms of positioning. If you want to stay out of trouble, you just stay inside that crowd. Right? The crowd itself is its own protection. There is safety in numbers, and there is safety for you if you just stay away from the edge of the crowd. Now, the truth is, I could actually stop there because already, just with those 4 things, what you're wearing, the props that you're carrying, the demeanor that you have, and then your positioning within the crowd, you are able to get in and get out and participate in these protests with negligible risk. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say nothing bad can happen. You can never say that. But the risk to you is absolutely negligible. And if you're worried about the risk to you, think about those 4 things and think, well, could I do those? Could I dress in a nondescript manner? Can I put something in my hand that makes me kind of invisible and disappear? Can I just behave myself and behave calmly no matter what happens? And can I stay deep within the crowd once the crowd forms? If you can do those 4 things, then in my opinion, you can safely show up and participate in these protests without any real risk. Your absolute worst case scenario, like I said at the very start, is that you go home with a piece of paper in your hand. You go home with a piece of paper in your hand from the police telling you that you've been a naughty boy. And you magically owe them some money because you exercised your right to protest. If that's your worst case scenario, I don't see what's stopping you at that point in time. However, there is quite a lot more to talk about, because whilst the protest on Saturday gone was successful, there are some lessons that we can learn from some mistakes that were made. And I don't say that directed at anybody, because the decisions in a crowd are being made by the crowd. It's a hive mind, right? There's no individual making these decisions. But as a group, we made some poor decisions partway through the protest. We made some excellent decisions for a lot of the protest, and then we made a couple of poor decisions, and that led to the confrontations, and it led to the violence. It gave the police what they wanted, and they had the opportunity for the violence that they thrive on, that gives them the win from a PR point of view. They win. If there's violence, the police win automatically. And idiots like Francesca Ricky are absolute proof of that in the comments, where as soon as there's violence, the police are completely absolved. It must have been all your fault. And so the police actually have a vested interest in creating confrontation. So we'll talk about that and tactics next. So let me talk tactics from the very start of the last protest and kind of work my way chronologically through. And if you watch my video of the protest, I'm also kind of covering tactics. That's in real time. Like, my headspace is not at the high level looking at it. My headspace is in the moment looking at the particular situation. So let me talk from a more high level about the tactics of the situation, the tactics of a protest. Firstly, the first critical moment is the actual start of the protest. And this is one of the most difficult moments of all. And I want to say the organizers did this brilliantly. This is the best start of a protest that we've seen so far. Now, to be clear, if anyone's in any doubt, I'm not an organizer, right? I get notified and I go, yep, I'm going to be there. And I put it up on my page and I show up. All right. Sometimes they ask me to speak. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I get to. Sometimes I don't. But I'm not one of the organizers. But the organizers did a really great job with the start of this most recent protest. And what happened as a result? So actually, let's contrast the most recent protest with the protest before. The protest before that, the meeting point was the corner of Flinders Street and Swanson Street, which unfortunately is a location that gives the police a lot of parking for all of their vehicles. And by that, I mean all of their paddy wagons to drag people away, their various lockup buses with multiple different cells in them, their vehicles that have all of the gear for the riot cops and all the kind of the people that are spoiling for a fight, looking for violence. They can congregate there, and they've got parking for their vehicles in the church. I think it's the St. John or something on the corner, whatever that is, as well as in a few other places. They've got the car park just around at the Federation Square, just past Federation Square as you head up Flinders Street. They've got all the parking there, and if you scout, as I have, you'll see them set up there, and it's a great location for them. So probably not an ideal choice of location in the first place. I don't blame anyone for that, but in hindsight, probably sticking with starting locations where there isn't as much parking available, as stupid as that sounds, makes it a little bit harder for the police to be organized and on the spot. The other thing that happened really, really well was the coming together of people at that critical moment. So what happens is you've got this problem where once you've got 1,000 people or more, the police have to take a bit more of a step back approach. If you've got less than 1,000 people, and especially if you've got less than 500 people, the police can try and kettle and do some of the tactics that we've seen them do in the past. And so what happens then, if we look at not the most recent protest, the one before that, we had about 500 people tried to make it to the corner of Flinders Street and Swanson Street, and they got blocked by the police. They got held in Swanson Street. Now, if you're a group and you're marching and you're going to stop, don't stop in the middle of a strip. Stop in an intersection where there's 4 different ways for you to get out at a minimum. I mean, ideally, you want to be in an open area where you can just get out anywhere. But at a minimum, stop at an intersection. So if the police are set up for you and they're waiting for you down the other end and they're going to block you into a strip, stop at the intersection before. Make them come to you and make sure that you've got the options. But unfortunately, what happened in that particular protest was the people marched straight down to where the police were, which is normal human psychology. And we did it again in the most recent protest, and I'll get to that. But that's something we need to stop doing. All right, we need to stop marching up to the police when they're sitting there waiting for us for reasons that I'll go through later. But we did that 2 protests ago. What happened then is it's very easy for the police to form a line at the back. And if you go back to my video from, I think it was the 24th of July, I think, I walked inside that area that had been cordoned off by the police. The police were allowing people in and out through one particular corner. I walked in there and I kind of showed the whole tactical situation on video, and I talked it through and I showed who was who and where the commanders were and blah, blah, blah. And then I exited because I'm not a masochist. I'm not here to try and get arrested. So I got out of that particular spot. But my expectation was that those 500 or so people that had now been sectioned off by the police were all going to get kettled. That was my expectation. Now, to my delight, that's not what worked out. That's not what happened. The crowd actually broke through the police line, and we all were combined then because there were a huge number of people outside of that police cordon area, and we marched around, and it was a great protest. So I'm happy to have been proven wrong there, but tactically, we made a mistake by actually marching up to where the police were and letting ourselves get stuck in that alleyway there. Unfortunately, we made the same mistake again in last weekend's protest, but I'll get to that in a minute. So the challenge with starting a protest is, how do you get 1,000 people together without getting pounced on when you only have 500 people or 200 people or 100 people? How do you create that moment? And the organizers successfully achieved that with the most recent protest. It's the best that I've seen it done. And when I arrived, which was pretty much right on start time, I arrived at the intersection of Little Burke and Elizabeth Street, and instantly there were hundreds of people, and within minutes there were 1,000 people there. And we very quickly had the critical numbers that we needed, where the police really just had to stand back and let us exercise our democratic human right, as protected under the Victorian Charter of Human Rights and Responsibilities, to be involved in political protest. And they didn't have a choice because there were too many of us in the one place too fast. So that is a big tick. That's something that the organizers did really well, and everyone involved did really well. I just want to say I really appreciate Francesca and all the people replying to her. It's fantastic. This video is getting pushed out to a lot of people. So thank you for the trolling and for all of the replies. I'm going to voluntarily offer Francesca Ricky a top fan badge because I think she's really helping my page at the moment. So from the start, we all coalesced. That worked really, really well. Whoever brought the loudspeaker, great choice, great music as well. And it makes a lot of noise, and that helps people to find you, right? And it helps to bring people in. Once that noise starts, the people are like, oh, what's that? That must be them. And they get to you really quickly. And we saw that. If you look at my live stream, you can see people just pouring in from every direction. And that's because of the amount of people that are hearing the noise. The amount of noise that we're making really contributes to that. So then what happens? Well, what happens then is the police start to respond. And police commanders sitting there going, oh, fuck. Right? We look like idiots now. And they're embarrassed because they were supposed to stop that from happening. They had police on every corner. Like literally when I was scouting, they had police on every single corner, all the way up Swanson Street as far as Latrobe, all the way up Elizabeth Street and all the way up William Street, trying to make sure no one could get to the intersection of Burke and Elizabeth Streets. They had every single surrounding intersection swamped with cops. This was never supposed to happen, and yet somehow we pulled it off. So suddenly they're embarrassed, and now they start trying to respond, okay? They view protests that they're trying to shut down as a tactical situation. Obviously, they didn't view BLM the same way. They don't view anything that they like the politics of. Anything that Daniel Andrews approves of course, is treated very differently. But any protest that is against Daniel Andrews, Victoria Police have become sort of Daniel Andrews' private army, and they try and shut it down. And so they think about it in military terms, in terms of a tactical situation. So what do they want to do now? Well, number one, they want to contain the group, and they want to stop us from being able to do things like, for example, march on Parliament House or get to any other areas that we might want to get to. They want to try and take options away from us and dictate the terms from now on. How do we stop that? Well, the number one way to stop that is to stay on the move. And not long after we all coalesced and we gathered on the corner of Little Burke Street and Elizabeth Street, the group then started to move. And again, it's a hive mind decision, but it was the right decision. We started to march. We started to move. That keeps the police chasing us. And actually, it wasn't long after we moved, I was towards the back of the crowd at one point, and I turned around and I saw all these, like, I don't know, they were like 5 deep cops all kind of hustling to keep up with us. Now, remember, the police are carrying a lot of equipment. They're carrying all their different radios and comms. They're carrying their tasers and their pepper sprays and their guns and all the other gubbins, the stab-proof vests and everything else. They've got a lot of weight on them. The last thing they want to do is be running around behind us. But if we stay on the move, that's exactly what they have to do. They've got no other choice. If the police command are going to try and get resources in the right place, they've got to hustle, and they're going to be running, and they're going to be sweating. And so that's exactly what we did, and that was the right move, and that's exactly what we needed to keep doing, and we did for quite a long time. The one note that I will make is sometimes the police try and limit our options. They try to take away one of the choices that we have in terms of which direction we could go in. And they do that by lining up the cops there. And they're basically saying, don't go this way. Okay? And that's fine. I don't have a huge issue with that, but you need to be thinking, always be looking ahead. If you're up towards the front of the crowd and you're the one thinking, do we go this way? Do we go that way? Have a good look, right? Don't just go whichever way feels easy, because sometimes that's the police trying to corral you into somewhere, into a situation that they can control. And what I would especially say is sometimes we're so far ahead of them that they actually have just a couple of cop cars on the corner, okay? And what they'll do is they'll position the cop cars, one in the middle of this street, one in the middle of that street in front of you. And so the natural instinct is to go where the cop car isn't and to turn right or to go straight ahead if they've got them on either side or whatever it may be. You need to be very aware of that. Now, sometimes that's innocent. Sometimes it's just them scrambling, and that's all the resources they could get in that location in that amount of time. But sometimes it's actually them trying to get you towards a confrontation. We'll talk about the confrontation that happened on the weekend in just a couple of minutes. So sometimes it's worth looking at it going, you know what, they've parked a couple of cop cars here and here. Instead of going in the place where they've left open to us, which is the obvious choice and clearly the choice they want us to make, maybe we should all just go around one of the cop cars and just keep on going in our direction. Sometimes looking at it from the point of view of whatever they want me to do, I will do something different. Sometimes helps to keep them really off balance, right? Why do they want you to turn that corner in that direction? Well, maybe it's because they've got all their riot squads somewhere down there, and it's easier for them to get them up and cut you off if you turn that corner than it would be if you kept going, right? Anytime you as part of the crowd sit there and go, oh, we'll just do what's easy, think about it. Easy for who? Right? We don't want to make it easy for them. We want it to be easy for us. And sometimes that means not doing what's obvious. So I will say that I think there were a few times where we allowed ourselves to be led without necessarily realizing that that's what we were doing. And sometimes going around the cop cars is actually the smart play instead of going where there's no cop cars. Now, that all went well. We marched around, we made our point, we made lots of noise. Then things went wrong. And we need to talk about this because this is quite a serious thing where unfortunately a lot of the message that we brought and a lot of that atmosphere, the really wonderful, friendly, celebratory atmosphere was kind of lost and kind of wasted because we ended up in a confrontation. Why? Why did we end up in this ridiculous confrontation in front of Flinders Street Station, stuck in an alley where they could have cut us off from behind, and they were preparing to. By the time we got out only just in time. It was about to get really, really ugly. So we came down, I believe it was William Street. We reached Flinders Street. Now, at that point, we're either going to turn left or right. Okay. And it's pretty obvious to the police that we're going to turn left, because if we turn right, what are we going to do? Go to King Street, go to whatever that last one is, Spencer Street. You know, what are we going to do? No, of course we're going to turn left. They already know that. Then we turn left, and down in the distance, 2 city blocks away, you could already see all of the police lined up, riot shields, multiple layers of police, ready and waiting for a fight. They were lined up, blocking us off so that if we went all the way down to them, we would be stuck in an alleyway. We would be stuck on Flinders Street, in between Elizabeth Street and Swanston Street. We would be stuck in that alleyway. Worst possible place for us to be. And they were ready. It's not like they were going to ambush us, staying out of the way, let us come down and then jump in there. No. We could see them from 2 city blocks away. Now, what did I just say? Sometimes when the police want you to do a certain thing, you need to consciously do this. You need to disappoint them. You need to do the thing that they don't want you to do. What did they want us to do? They wanted us to march right up to them and have a confrontation. What should we have done? We should have turned left up Elizabeth Street. Okay, and just kept on marching around and having our fun and having our party on the streets there and making our political point without that confrontation. And that nearly happened. The crowd actually nearly split. A whole bunch of people wanted to go up Elizabeth Street, but there were a number of people. And again, I can't blame you guys for wanting to do this. I get it. It's human nature. It's the psyche of the situation. It's hurting you so much. You're losing so much. And you kind of want to vent and you want to take that out on somebody. But when the police invite you to come and have a confrontation, the dumbest thing to do is accept the invitation. Okay, so this was a mistake. Part of the crowd tried to go up Elizabeth Street. Part of the crowd continued down Flinders Street towards where the police were waiting with riot shields and pepper spray and all the rest of it. And for a little while, it looked like the actual entire march was going to split, which would have been not a good outcome. In the end, I was literally standing in between the 2 groups. I'm like, if you watch the video, I've got my camera kind of like, there's those people over there going up Elizabeth Street. There's these people down here heading down Flinders Street. Guys, we can't split. We can't allow that to happen, right? If we start fragmenting, then we make ourselves very, very vulnerable. In the end, the group that were going to head up Elizabeth Street relented, and they turned around and they came and joined the other group that were determined to head towards the police. That was the less bad option, right? Staying as one group in the wrong place is a less bad option than fragmenting. But honestly, I really wish the people that led us down Flinders Street had not done so, because what followed, unfortunately, has clouded our entire message out of that protest. And everyone that participated in that protest, unfortunately, everything that we tried to achieve has been clouded by that. Now, I want to be clear, and Francesca, I hope you're listening. We did not start the violence. That wasn't us. We marched up to the police. There was certainly an exchange of verbaling and what have you. And yep, that's not ideal. It's not great. But again, we're human beings and people are losing everything and they're angry. So I'm not going to say that, you know, like, I'm not going to ask people to be saints. You can't be saints. People are angry. They vented their anger. And then I saw people started throwing water bottles. Not ideal, guys. Like, seriously, you're there in a t-shirt or maybe a jacket with slogans and signs and chants and what have you. They are there with body armor, face shields, helmets, riot shields, batons, pepper spray, tear gas, rubber bullets, beanbag rounds, and real guns with live ammunition. Why are you picking a fight? Run through that scenario in your head and try and arrive at a conclusion where you actually gain something out of having a fight with these people. And don't forget, their sense of self-righteousness is absolute. It's exactly like Francesca's in the comments right now, okay? The absolute self-righteousness that they are the good guys, okay? Their conscience is not going to stop them from going and laying into you and shooting you if they deem it necessary. People ask me, oh, what's that cop, the cop who shot Matt Lawson? Who's he? How's he going to sleep tonight? Pretty freaking well. He's going to sleep just fine. Okay. These people don't think the way that you or I think. They are very much trained into this kind of way of thinking that the law is all there is, and these people are breaking the law, therefore they're bad, and therefore we have to do whatever it takes to pull them into line. That's their way of thinking. So I'm sorry, but you're not going to, I hear people appealing to the police to switch sides, and I think that's a good approach. If you're going to say something to the cops, that's probably a better thing to say than abuse, and not probably, it's definitely a more useful thing to say than abuse, but they're not going to switch sides. They're not going to do that right then and there and switch sides. Like we saw them kneeling in front of the BLM protests. That's not because their consciences got to them. It's because the politics were different. Their orders were different. They're not going to do that with us, right? You need to accept that. They're not going to do that with us. What we need to do is avoid giving the media what they want. What do the media want? They want images of people trying to hurt the cops. They want images of people throwing things at the cops. Listen, if you throw a bottle at the cops and then the cop shoots you in the head, what's going to make the news? It's you throwing the bottle at the cops, right? The media want to portray you as the problem. So let's not give them that. So in my opinion, marching down to a fully prepared riot line of police officers out the front of Flinders Street Station was a tactical mistake that we all made, me included, okay? Keeping the crowd together was the lesser of the available evils, but as a crowd, as a protest, we made a mistake, and we should never have given them what they wanted. We should have turned left up Elizabeth Street and kept on marching peacefully, and continuing to make our point without actually having that confrontation in front of the cops. So just a little bit more on tactics. So, okay, now, so after that, we then got moving again. We turned around the other way just in time because the police, you'll see it in my full live stream, the police were preparing up some of the alleyways and on Elizabeth Street. They were getting the numbers in place where it wouldn't have been much longer, another 10 minutes, another 15 minutes, they would have had the numbers in place to actually try and box us in. Now, that would be a mistake on their part, in my opinion, but they could have attempted that only 10, 15 minutes after when we actually got out of that situation. So I would suggest that, number one, we made a mistake to get into that situation. We stayed in that situation for too long, and we got out only just in time. And we managed to keep the group together just. And again, if you watch my full coverage, you'll see that, where we were having to call people back away from the police line to get them out in time. Otherwise, the police were going to split the protest, and those people that were left were going to end up being kettled and all the rest of it. All's well that ends well, in the sense that we all did get out, but unfortunately not before a lot of damage was done in terms of our message and the clarity of our message, which was lost because of that confrontation. So moving on, we then started marching around again, and then your thoughts have to start turning to, how do we get out? How do I get home, right? Without a confrontation with the police, without getting arrested, without getting whatever. Now, this is a tricky one, because the safest and most obvious thing to do is to leave early, right? Leave while there's still a full crowd. Leave while the police are still preoccupied with what the crowd is doing and not really that interested with what individuals are doing or small groups are doing as they filter out and leave. But of course, that to a degree is kind of leaving everyone else in the lurch, because as you filter away, they're still there and their numbers are dwindling, and gradually they're becoming more and more vulnerable. So this question of how to get out, it becomes a really valid one. And it's a tricky one because, I have a lot of sympathy for this idea of don't leave anyone behind. It's what we were trying to do while we were there on Flinders Street, and we realized how close the police were to actually cutting us off. We tried to get everyone out, and we successfully did, right? We want to get everyone out. We don't want anyone to become easy pickings for the police to then sort of grab. But by the same token, if you are someone who's vulnerable, if you're someone who maybe you're older or for whatever reason you can't move as fast, you've got a valid reason, I think, to just go, you know what, I'm going to use the safety provided by the crowd and the fact that the crowd is still here to disappear before the numbers start to dwindle. But there is a reality that there are going to be a lot of people. There's going to be hundreds of people who are going to find themselves in a situation where the numbers have dwindled to the point that they're actually vulnerable. And there comes a point, and I was talking about this in the live stream, there comes a point where you just have to look around and go, okay, it's time. We all just get out, right? Let's just go home. And the real problem happens, and we've seen this with previous protests, the real problem happens when a small number of people try to be hardcore and stick around and keep it going and blah, 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 right? That's a really bad idea, guys. You know, you're putting yourself in a situation where you are outnumbered, where you're definitely outgunned and you're out-weaponed. And by then, the police are fed up. And whatever else has happened, any little altercations that have happened throughout the protest, the police then use as justification to say, well, this was a violent protest, so we're going to go in hard on these people who are left. If you're one of those people who's kind of like, yeah, I'm going to stick around, I'm going to have a fight with the cops, please don't come in the first place, okay? I appreciate your support and I appreciate your passion, but just don't come in the first place, okay? If that's what you're looking for, this isn't the place for you. Go join an Extinction Rebellion protest, or there's lots of other idiot groups out there who love having violence in their protests. Go and hang out with them. But if you're here for the right reasons and you just start to realize, hang on, our numbers are dwindling. Those other people that wanted to head off early, they've done that. And now we're starting to get vulnerable. That's when you need to actually be starting to say to other people around you, hey guys, I think it's time. I think it's time for us to split. Remember that hive mind, okay? No one person makes the decision, but if enough people are starting to think the same things and someone vocalizes it and said, hey guys, it's time, we've got to go, we've got to get out, then that can spread fairly quickly through the crowd. And hopefully that will then achieve what you want to achieve is everyone splits at basically the same time. Everyone's going home while the cops are still in the mindset of we're managing this crowd. Right? If they're aware that the crowd is dwindling and now they can kind of shift gears and start to look for individuals or start to look for small groups, well, getting out gets hard at that point. But if they're still in the mindset that there's this big protest here and they're managing the protest, etc., and then all of a sudden, before they can shift gears, before they can shift tactics, everyone's heading off in their own direction. And they're sitting there on the radio, hey guys, hey boss, everyone's leaving, right? You've got a much better chance of everyone actually being able to make it home safely, peacefully, to their families, to their homes, without being arrested, without being brutalized by the police. We saw that with the police trying to pick off people and initiating violence against people who were stragglers in the crowd or other things like that. I unfortunately, I don't have any footage of this, but I have an eyewitness account that was given to me in person. As I was heading to the car, someone else saw me and recognized me and said hi, and they said that they had just seen a cop with a riot shield run like this hero and just body slam someone into the ground, completely knocked them over. The person rolled over looking at them, and it was an Asian student who lived in the city and was literally just in the city. They weren't a protester at all. And so then what did the cop do? They then just kept on running. It's like, oh dear, I just committed assault. I'm just going to keep on running here. And unfortunately, they get away with it because they're the police. So you don't want to find yourself in that situation where that sort of stuff is happening. So there comes a point, and there's no rule for this. I can't tell you when to do it or what to do, but there comes a point where you've got to look around and go, okay, everybody, I think it's time to go. I think it's time to split, and at least give the people that are going to listen to you the chance to split at the same time as you. If there's some hardcore group that wants to stick around and get their heads cracked open by the cops, well, good on them. Okay, you can't save everybody, but at least you can give everybody an opportunity to be able to get out and get home as safely as possible. So that's kind of my summation of the tactics from start to finish. Some things this most recent protest were done brilliantly well, the best we've seen. The start was fantastic. The first hour or so was fantastic, right up until we made the mistake of accepting the police's invitation. They invited us to a confrontation. And for some crazy reason, we accepted the invitation, and we should never have done that. So with that exception, I think things did pretty well. And unfortunately, the message was damaged and was lost as a result of the one mistake that we made. But this is the nature of these things. This is the nature of every protest movement that there's ever been. It's the same in Hong Kong. It's the same in France. It's the same everywhere you look where there's protest movements. You've got decentralized organizers that are deliberately trying to remain decentralized so that they're not vulnerable to just one person being locked up. And you've got a whole bunch of people that are there for their own reasons, with their own particular passions around why they're there and what it is that they care about, and their own particular ideas of what they want to do while they're there. And then, the crowd, like I said, kind of makes decisions as a hive mind. So that's the tactics from start to finish, and where I think we got it right, where I think we got it wrong, and we should really be looking to improve. And what I would really encourage, I'd encourage myself to smoke this a little bit faster so it doesn't go out. Okay, I'll relight. I would really encourage those of you that are non-confrontational, that are actively wanting to avoid that sort of stuff, please be more vocal. When these hive mind decisions are being made, and I know that some of you already are, okay, I'm not saying you're not, but when these hive mind decisions are being made, and we're seeing this decision being made between, do we go this way, do we go that way? If you can see an obvious, that's a confrontation, that's not a confrontation, speak up and really encourage those around you to join you in the non-confrontational option. Because by default, those that are a bit more confrontational are they're just going to head off and want to do their thing. And it can be very easy to kind of fall in behind them and go, okay, we're doing this. But it's those of us that are wanting to avoid those sorts of confrontations that really need to be speaking up and trying to minimize the chance of that happening, just for the sake of the message, for the sake of the media coming out. Now, a few comments have been made about how the media are never going to be on our side and they're never going to portray us fairly. And that's absolutely true. But that doesn't mean that we should just be handing them easy attack angles, right? You're absolutely right. They're not our friends. The media aren't our friends, and they're never going to be. At the very last minute, as we're winning, as we're about to win, they'll jump on board our cause and they'll pretend like they were on our side the whole time. But until then, they are going to use every single trick in the book against us, and that's absolutely true. That doesn't mean that we should be lazy or careless about giving them the angles that they want. Okay, so I said that tonight was going to be fairly short. I've got one more thing, or two more things: optics and messaging. Now that I'm done with tactics, and then I'll do a bit of a Q&A. So if you've got sort of questions, then don't put them in there now, because these comments will be long gone by the time I get to the Q&A. So I'll look at the comments. So at that point in time for a bit of a Q&A. So let's talk about optics and messaging. Number one, the media is not on our side. They never will be. They're always going to underreport our numbers. Now, I noticed that they acknowledged we had 4,000 people in the city on Saturday, which was pretty good, actually. I think we had 8 to 10, but that's okay. Previously, when we've had 4,000 people, like we had at the Shrine last year sometime, they tried to get away with reporting it as hundreds. So the fact that they're actually having to acknowledge thousands now is actually a step in the right direction. But if we could go back in time and delete that confrontation with the police that happened there on Flinders Street, our optics from the protest would mostly be pretty good. Now, there was another confrontation that happened in front of Parliament House that the police did initiate when they tried to cut us off. And some people pushed through the lines and some other things sort of happened around there. Okay. I actually wasn't close enough to that to really know what happened, so I'm not really going to comment on that. But if we could delete that major confrontation that happened in front of Flinders Street Station, the optics coming out of last week's protest would have been pretty good. It would have mostly just been people marching around, chanting with signs, singing songs, all that sort of stuff. And so this is another reason why we just need to be better at the tactics. We just need to be a little bit smarter, because we're kind of ruining our own optics. Messaging is really easy and really hard at the same time. And it's made that way because these protest movements are made up of thousands of individuals, and each of us has our own perspective and our own message that we want to bring to the protest and our own issue that we think should be the forefront issue. The challenge with messaging, or the question we need to ask ourselves with messaging, is who is the messaging for? Who are we actually trying to communicate with that message that we've got written on a sign, or that we've got on our t-shirt, or that we're chanting as a slogan? Who is this message actually designed to reach, and what do we want it to achieve with that person, in the mind of that person? And this is something I've been grappling with now for 12 years, ever since I started doing videos. It's the very first thing you have to ask yourself. What's my message? Who am I trying to reach? And what am I trying to persuade them of with this particular message? The problem with most of the messages that we are bringing is that they're not suitable for the very first, for someone when they are very first coming out of kind of that haze of believing everything the mainstream media tells them, believing everything the government tells them, blah, blah, blah. When, there's a lot of people, there's a huge number of people who are right now for the very first time questioning what they're seeing and asking themselves whether, the premier is actually telling the truth, whether the chief health officer is actually right. They're asking themselves these questions for the first time. And when they look around and they see a protest movement that's got a bunch of stuff that they just can't comprehend, stuff about pedophiles, stuff about the Illuminati, stuff about even the UN, as much as I know the UN is behind a lot of this stuff, that message is not one that is going to be accepted by the people that we need to be winning over. And so the messaging needs to be speaking directly to the point of pain for the average person. The messaging needs to be about the lockdowns. The messaging needs to be about our children's welfare, their mental health, their social development, their physical health. The messaging needs to be about the points of pain that the average person who's not at the protest, remember, you're not writing these slogans and these signs for the other people at the protest. You're writing them because other people who are not at the protest are going to see things on social media, maybe see things on the news, and you need them to be able to identify with the messages that you are bringing. And that's my key message about messages, that you need to be thinking about it in terms of someone who is asking questions for the very first time. Is this message that I want to bring, is the thing that I want to say suitable for the person who's just asking their very first questions? Or is it actually more coming from me who's been asking questions for years? If you've been asking questions for years and you've been somewhat doubtful of governmental authority and so forth for years, then you've gone down a certain progression, a certain path, you've arrived at certain conclusions. If you present those conclusions to people who are just questioning the government's authority for the very first time, you might as well be from another planet. You need to dial those messages back to the things, to the points of pain that they are feeling, to the impacts that they can see. And if we could get onto those kinds of messages, then you can actually shift someone's thinking. You can have someone go, hey, this guy's right, or that girl's right. That sign, that's exactly, I was asking myself the same question the other day, right? And so focusing on the points of pain that people are experiencing is far more valuable from a messaging point of view than maybe telling the truth as you would see it, maybe explaining the whole thing as you would see it, but they're not ready for it. And then it's actually going to push people away. It's actually going to keep people away. So that is my point on messaging. So hopefully from tonight, what we've kind of covered is what you can wear, the props you can bring, how to behave, how to position yourself within the crowd, the tactics for the crowd itself and the tactics within a protest itself and how we move and what we do. And then finally on optics and on messaging. Hopefully that's kind of helped a little bit. And if we can just get more people, obviously not everyone that comes to protests watches this. There's been only a couple of hundred people watching this. There's thousands of people at the protests. So, obviously there's lots of people at the protests that are never going to see this. But if we can have more people within the crowd who are across this sort of stuff and helping to make those hive mind decisions, do we turn this way? Do we go that way? And helping to influence the crowd in those moments, the more people that we have that are making better decisions, then the better outcomes we can achieve with these protests, perhaps without the missteps that we have made in the past. So that's my objective for tonight. I hope that this has been useful. I hope that it's made sense to you and you're sitting there going, okay, I hope that it's given some courage to those of you that might have not been wanting to come along to protest out of fear, and the police want to perpetuate that fear. They want you to be afraid. I hope that tonight has given you a little bit of courage and a little bit of context and a little bit of an ability to put together a plan of maybe what you can do and how you can behave and how you can maybe participate without putting yourself at undue risk. Like I said, I've not been arrested or even given a fine or anything at any of the protests so far. I'm given fines because I'm very public about the fact that I'm there, and they send them to me in the mail later on. I know lots of people who've been to these protests never received a fine, and those that have received fines, to my knowledge, they always get thrown in the bin once they nominate to have them taken to court. To my knowledge, there might be some exceptions to that, but I'm not aware of the exceptions. So I'm going to take some questions, and Tony and Francesca, you can already write yourselves off. I'm not going to be answering your questions, but I'm happy to answer any good faith questions asked by people who aren't trying to be trolls, and have a bit of a Q&A. So feel free to wind up. I mean, obviously you're under no obligation to be here. If you've got other things to do, please feel free, but I'm going to stick around and have a bit of a Q&A for those that want to actually have a Q&A. And if you don't, then that's good. Go and enjoy your evening. Say hi to your families. And we're going to keep on going here. So Scott has said, can you speak on the value of leaderless resistance and the danger of charismatic leaders? Yeah, this is a good one. And it's a tricky one. We all want to be kind of led. We all get drawn to that strong personality type, whether it's a Trump or a Hitler or whoever it may be. We kind of that lightning rod leader who just says things and we're all like, yeah. That's a really dangerous thing, because you often can be very quickly led down a pretty dangerous path, as we see from history. Leaderless movements are more resilient and probably less prone to being taken down the wrong path. But by the very virtue of being leaderless, they're a bit more complicated. There's the internal politics and who do you trust and all of that sort of stuff going on. So what we have in the protest movement at the moment is a fairly leaderless movement. I don't even know who the organizers are. I have one point of contact. That's it. All right. I don't even know who the others are. And I don't want to know. And I think that's a good thing. But at the same time, I don't know, like, I'm not one of the leaders, but I try to be a spokesperson. I try to get the message out. And I think the key is this: each of us just playing our little part. Right? I play my little part. The organizers play their little part. The people that come along play their little part. And each of us just doing our little bit. I believe we are making progress. It's not particularly visible yet, but that's the nature of how these things go. It's not visible until suddenly something big happens. It's like a dam bursting. You don't really see much changing. Maybe there's a few cracks here and there, but you can't really see much. And then all of a sudden it fails. And that's the way these things usually go. We won't know whether or not we're really getting anywhere until all of a sudden, oh, wow, that happened. And we've achieved something, and that's going to happen pretty suddenly. So James is saying, I nominated and I have a court date. That's interesting. They've never even given me a court date. Okay. I trust that you're aware of Rebel Media. Get in touch with Rebel Media, fight the fines, and see whether you're a candidate to be able to jump onto the fight the fines class actions and so forth that they're doing. Andrew, nice to see you there on Saturday. Nice to see you too. Julie saying kids and teens involvement opinion. I have no problem with bringing teenagers along. Kids, I would balk at bringing kids, and I understand the motivation for bringing kids. You're wanting to show that this is a family event, that you are ordinary people, family people. Sorry, I just don't want this going out of me again. I would say if you choose to bring young people along, you have a responsibility then to stay deep inside the crowd and right away from trouble, right? If there's a confrontation brewing, you have a responsibility to those people that you brought with you to stay right the fuck away. I'm not going to say don't do it, because who am I to say that, right? If that's in your judgment, if that's what you decide to do and that's what you want to do that. But I think you have an obligation to be hyper aware of what's going on and keeping those people right away from trouble. IRN, do I have political aspirations? Aspirations, definitely not. Am I reluctantly going to allow myself to get dragged into the arena of politics? Possibly. And if I did a slow chat the other day with Senator Malcolm Roberts. Oh, come on. And at the end of that, I did have a discussion with him about what it's like being a senator and some of the sacrifices that he's had to make. And I am in discussions with some others. I certainly don't rule it out. No decision has been made. I've been in political commentary for 12 years. I did not get into this in order to get into politics. when people have asked me in the past, could you run for politics? Could you stand as a candidate? My answer has always been a bit of a glib one, but also a true one. And that is that I want to do something useful with my life, and that kind of rules out politics. And let me explain that a little bit. My passion is in business, and I'm not particularly good at it, unfortunately, but I'm learning and I'm getting better, and I'm getting to the point where I think I can start to do some good things in business. And my passion is in business because that creates real value. When you create a business and you're creating jobs and you've got happy customers that are willingly giving you their money in return for what you're offering, you are literally making the world a better place. I think business done right makes the world a better place. In politics, what you're doing is, particularly if you're a libertarian in politics, you're basically in a role of damage limitation. You're just trying to reduce the amount of damage and harm that's being done by the government. And that's not a particularly fun place to be. So that's not where I really want to be. I am asking myself whether this moment, though, because there are so many people getting politically active now who have never been politically active before, I'm asking myself whether this maybe is a moment where I should think about it. Well, I am thinking about it, whether maybe I should do it. Do I have aspirations? No. Might I do it anyway? Maybe. Watch this space, because my mind is very much not made up. I'm in conversation with a few different parties in the background to try and decide what my next move is. But if I do it, it will be somewhat reluctantly. Grebo's been watching me since the North-South Pipeline nonsense. That was my second ever video, so thank you. Please ruin for Parliament. That's a Freudian slip there. Please ruin for Parliament. That is pretty much how it would work out. I have no desire to be in politics, but I might spend some time. We'll see. Okay. Concerned about where to park. I live outside of Melbourne. Park half a kilometre out of the city. You won't have a problem. I've never had a problem. Is anything happening with the truckies? I don't know, Craig. This is a great question. And I've stocked up. I've got my fridge is stocked, my pantry is stocked, and the fuel tank is full in the car in case something does happen. They were getting really angry. They're getting screwed over. It's ridiculous what's being done to the truckies. So they're getting screwed over in terms of COVID, having to take COVID tests, having to have all kinds of paperwork to be able to cross the border, threats that they're going to have vaccinations in order to be able to continue to do their job. And then in New South Wales, all the roadhouses were closed. It was just awful. They couldn't even have showers. They couldn't actually have dinner inside a roadhouse. They were just basically getting takeaway food and going back and sitting in the same cab of the same truck that they're in 18 hours a day already. So the New South Wales government has backed down on some of the most ridiculous stuff. The roadhouses are open, for example. So that might have taken some of the anger out for the truckies. So I don't know what's going to happen. The other thing is there were two different dates being proposed for what was meant to happen. One was today, and I haven't heard anything yet. I'm not aware of anything. Maybe something has happened. I'm not aware of anything having happened. The other date is the 31st. So I'm going to keep the fridge stocked. I'm going to keep the car full until after the 31st and just see what happens there. But no, I don't know what's going to happen with that. How many Victorian politicians have condemned the police violence from the protests? Not enough. What politicians are sympathetic to the cause and do they join the protests? So David Limbrick has joined the protests. Tim Quilty is from Northern Victoria, so he's often not here when the protests are on, but he's also sympathetic. And also there is a lady who's an MP who joined David Limbrick and Tim Quilty out the front of Parliament House for a little while when they did their protest against the I'll think of her name and I'll mention it to you because she deserves a mention. Goodness, why can't I think of her name? So there are a few, but there's not nearly enough. Have I read John Stuart Mill? Yes, of course I have. Highly recommended reading. His book on liberty is absolutely mandatory reading. The truckies, I've already answered that. Yeah, so how do we deal with premiers like McGowan who believe they're above criticism and show disdain to being questioned? This is a universal problem. This is not just McGowan. This is definitely Daniel Andrews. I would say it's Prime Minister Scott Morrison as well, all the state premiers. By not going away, understand these people are making mistakes in terms of how they're handling the coronavirus, in terms of their application of the lockdowns. They don't have the scientific basis that they claim to have. It's not based on scientific advice. It's not based on medical advice. The emperor has no clothes. Right? And we are the people that are calling out and saying, hey, the emperor has no clothes. But it's going to take a very long time for other people to start to see that. And it's persistence by not going away. I have a philosophy that so far has served me well, that the truth always wins in the end. Sometimes it takes a very long time. And it sucks to be right early, right? It sucks to be right when the majority of people are still wrong. Okay, that sucks. It's a pain in the ass. But that's where we're at. Okay, and we just have to be consistent and keep on putting the message out there and saying, this is what's really going on. This is how we could have handled the coronavirus so much better than what we've done. And we maintain that message. And over time, slowly, more and more people start to come around and go, actually, I think maybe you were right all along. The number of people now that I've had come to me apologizing for having criticized me when I spoke at the Anzac Day protest in 2020. And now they've actually got the guts and the courage to come back to me and say, hey, Topher, I was wrong, and I want to thank you for doing what you're doing. So it takes time, and you've got to be willing to cop the criticism. You've got to be willing to cop the abuse from the police, the abuse from the premier, the abuse from the media, and trust that in time, the truth will prevail. And I think that's where we're at right now. So Chris is saying, in regards to plan B and leaving the country, if things get bad enough, my thoughts on how to accomplish this if they mandate vaccines for international travel. Complicated. So for those of you that don't know, I am preparing a plan B for my own family because I've seen too many instances of countries around the world where a majority of people have enjoyed having the government's boot stomping on their head. I was personally in Venezuela in 2015. I won't retell the story, but that was a really influential trip and has really shaped my thinking on this, meeting people who saw it coming, who knew that the socialism that the majority wanted was going to be the absolute destruction of their country, but they didn't get out. So I'm still fighting for Australia. I think Australia is worth fighting for. I think it's one of the most incredible places in the world. The more I travel, the more I love Melbourne. I'm a Melbourne boy. I really do. I love Melbourne. But I cannot live in denial of what I'm seeing around me. And I cannot live in denial of the fact that a huge proportion of people seem to like it, which is terrifying, but it seems to be true. So a plan B and a thought of, okay, maybe Australia isn't the place where my children are going to have their children. I'm not thinking short term necessarily, but I'm thinking if this is the trajectory that this country is on, what does this look like in another 20 years, in another 30 years? What does this look like for my grandkids when they become adults? After I'm dead? There are other people that made the courageous choice to leave the country they were in and bring their families to an entirely new country. And for a long time, Australia was one of the destinations. It was the place they were trying to get to. But you know what? The world doesn't stay the same. The world changes. And the world is changing around us right now. And I have a very sincere concern that Australia is not going to be the place where I want my children to be having their children. So then the questions of where do you go? How do you get there? All that sort of stuff starts to come up. I'm of the view that vaccine passports, if they are brought in, will not last. The narrative around the vaccines is being deeply challenged by reality. The reality is that if you look at places like Gibraltar, Israel, Iceland, so many other places right now where they have very high vaccination rates, and I mean 80% plus. In the case of Gibraltar, it's 99% plus adult vaccination rate in Gibraltar. They are having outbreaks of COVID bigger than anything we've seen in Australia. Right? I did the numbers a couple of weeks ago on Gibraltar, and their outbreak, if you scaled it up to account for the size of the population, their outbreak was the equivalent to us having over 150 active cases at one time in Australia. That is an outbreak massively bigger than anything we've ever had. And that's happening with a 99% vaccination rate. Why? Well, because the vaccines, it turns out, aren't particularly good after a few months pass and aren't particularly good against variations of the virus. Or the testing issues with the PCR tests are continuing to be a problem even after vaccinations come out. Whatever the cause may be, the concept of COVID zero, that we're going to keep it out, we're never going to have COVID in society, we're never going to learn to live with it, is a fantasy that is going to fall apart. And the data is coming in that is really, really challenging that. So I think things may continue to get worse for another year, 18 months, maybe 2 years, but there is going to come a breaking point where the narrative simply cannot be sustained anymore. And they cannot keep pretending that this is something that they can keep out using vaccinations. That narrative is going to collapse. And once that happens, I think freedom of movement is going to start to increase again, etc. So my answer to the question is I'm holding out and hoping that in time, even if vaccine passports are introduced for international travel, that in time that will actually change and that you will be able to travel again without needing them. The other option is get a sailing boat. You know, if you really want to go drastic, get a sailing boat. Okay. The crowd needs to think Pac-Man, not Braveheart. Absolutely. That's a great analogy. Thinking tactically, it's Pac-Man. Run away from the ghosts, okay? Not Braveheart. Is there any way I can watch this again? So, just tuned in, massive Survivor fan. Well, thank you for tuning in after the end of Survivor. You'll be able to watch this again. Literally, once I finish, you should be able to just go onto my page and watch it from the start. Okay. Is there any possibility of opening a dialogue with Vic Pol on the subject of marshals and avoiding violent confrontations? No, they want the violent confrontations. It's in their interest to have the violent confrontations. So we just need to not give them what they want. Comments on the messaging is spot on. People need to think and actually learn to be succinct in their communication and just be on point for where people's heads are at. The people that we're trying to attract, think about them. Don't think about the other people that are already at the protest. There's no point messaging to them. Oops, that just jumped. Oh, goodness, it's just jumped over a bunch of people's comments. Well, there's a lot of comments here. Goodness me. Okay. Wow. I don't even know where. How many? Wow. You guys have really. Wow. Okay. There is no way I'm going to be able to get through all these comments. I'm really sorry, but that's a lot of comments. Thank you for the interaction and for your questions. But I'll sit here for as long as I can, for as long as my bladder will hold out. But wow, that is a lot of questions and comments. So thank you. Okay. Is that a VFR behind me? No, but you have very good taste. I quite like the VFRs, particularly before they went to variable valve timing. So the very first VFR 800 or the very last VFR 750, I do like. This is a CBR 1100XX Blackbird, if you're into your motorbikes. I'm here for my children's future. So am I. But I might also get out of Australia for my children's future for the same reason. And I will borrow a famous political line. My country did not leave me. I did not leave my country. My country left me. That is how I feel, certainly right now. How do we deal with the young angry men that go to the front line and want combativeness with the cops? There's a small element of them, but they become the visual ones. Yeah, that is a problem. But if the entire crowd had started marching up Elizabeth Street, then there would have come a point in time when those guys barreling down Flinders Street would have gone, oh shit, there's no one else here. We'd better get back with the crowd, right? So it's just a case of getting the hive mind to make the smart decision and stick with it and not be influenced by those small number of individuals who go looking for trouble, you know? Okay. Need to be like a flash mob coming in and leaving, jacket on, jacket off, hat on, hat off, etc. I think it's inappropriate to bring kids and dogs to these events at this point. Look, I think it's fair to say that you want to be very careful. If you're going to bring dependents, you want to be very, very careful. It's a blackbird that needs a wash. Yes, it is a blackbird. It does need a wash. It's been sitting here for a very long time. I've not ridden in far too long. Is there a better tactic than protests? Look, there are other tactics, and there are lots of people doing other tactics. But protests are a pretty important one. There's a lot of people who sit there feeling like they're completely alone and feeling like they're going crazy, right? Like the media and the politicians, they gaslight us. They try and make us feel like we're alone, that we're being selfish because we're worried about our livelihoods or our kids' social development or whatever. And a protest is a very visible way of telling people, hey, you're not alone. So even though there's other tactics that are being employed, I think the protests are important. You'd have my vote. Well, thank you. That means I'll get at least one vote. Yay. Someone suggesting Lib Dems. If I was going to run, it would probably be with the Lib Dems, but am I going to run? I don't know. Kids make the optics look more based around family issues. I agree, and that's why people do bring kids, but be careful. Just be careful. Next time the cops' tactic will be to block all the routes to the city. Mass gathering become harder as we have it now in Sydney. How do you get around this? Well, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. Every time I've gone into a protest, I've been expecting roadblocks and everything else, and it hasn't happened yet. So we'll see. We'll see. Is there an ability to get journalists who ask the hard questions into the daily presses to question Danny Boy on the lies, or is that wishful thinking? We saw a little tiny bit of that with Peter Credlin. She did a wonderful job, but pretty quickly you don't get invited anymore, and they just start to not accept your questions and that sort of stuff. So that's a hard one. If a politician does not want to be accountable, they have lots of tools at their disposal to avoid being accountable. And unfortunately, we're getting a masterclass in avoiding accountability right now. If you want to learn about Machiavellian politics, learn from Daniel Andrews. So Adam is saying, do I think that the international media coverage of Australia's insanity, the lockdown, zero-case fantasy and heavy-handed police force is starting to apply pressure on our government? Unfortunately, probably not yet, but it's certainly gathering momentum. And I'm actually going to be on my first ever international. I'm being interviewed by an American podcast, 11:30 a.m. on Thursday, our time, I think it is. It's on Wednesday evening, their time. And there's definitely a massive increase in international interest in what's happening here in Australia and America, especially because in America, they look at Australia as kind of the promised land. For a lot of Americans, Australia and New Zealand are their escape. Like, if things get too bad here, I'm just going to go to New Zealand. I'm just going to go to Australia. And now this is a really hard wake-up call for them to go, oh, actually, there is nowhere to go. Australia is actually worse than what they are. So the pressure is building, but just like the protests, it takes a lot of time to build that momentum and to maintain that momentum. And, eventually the dam bursts, but it's impossible to predict when that's actually going to happen. What do you think of the not above the law ads coming out? I just saw one for the first time today. I didn't even know these were coming out. I like them. I think this is a really important point. If you haven't seen the not above the law ads, I should actually dig one up and post it on my page. I will do that either tonight after this or tomorrow morning. I'll post one of these ads. This is a really important principle. I mean, this is what our entire government, the whole Westminster system is based on, this idea that the people who are in power are not above the laws that they are making. And the fact that we even have to make this point, it just blows my mind. So yeah, I like them. The one that I've seen so far, I like them. Okay, I don't understand that one. I stand with truckies. See my post. I'm a truckie. I must have missed your post. Sorry. Okay. Okay, so there must be Catherine Cummings. Thank you, Scott and Jill, and Jennifer, and there's probably others as well. Dennis, you've given me the name of the person I was trying to think of. Catherine Cummings is another Victorian MP who sat with Tim Quilty and David Limbrick out the front of Parliament House the other night when they were holding their sort of silent protest against the locking up of the playgrounds. So thank you for that. I appreciate that. George Christensen's been doing some good work federally as well. He did an amazing speech in Parliament that I did post onto my Facebook page earlier tonight, protesting basically in Parliament against the physical abuse and the violence brought by the police against the protest. Do I think strikes are more effective than protesting? They can be, but they come at a really high cost. Like a strike costs the people going on strike. And one of the unfortunate things about the situation we find ourselves in is that most people are already pretty low in their financial resources, in their reserves. All of what's happened has really pushed a lot of us sort of towards not the brink, but we're depleted. And then asking people to go on strike and lose income for weeks, potentially lose their jobs. If it's not a sanctioned industrial action, then they're risking termination of their employment, etc. It's a very costly strategy for those that choose to engage in it. Are they effective? They certainly can be. Something like a truckie strike, I think, could be tremendously effective. Am I in a position where I could really tell people to do it? Well, no, because it just comes at such a high personal cost for those individuals. Yes, so Catherine Cumming does have a mixed record, I will agree, but I do feel like she's one of those ones that has slowly been coming around. She, no pun on her name intended, she initially was really working with the Andrews government, and I think as time has gone by, Catherine Cumming has begun to sort of go, hang on, this doesn't feel right anymore. I think this has gone too far. And I think we need, as a movement, we need to leave a lot of room and have a lot of grace for people changing their minds. when someone was against us, but they come around, I think we need to have a lot of room in our ranks for those people. And as much as it might feel nice to want to try and get revenge on people that have caused us all of this harm, if they are going to come onto our side, or at least come around partly to our side, then I think that needs to be applauded and rewarded, and they need to be welcomed. So if Catherine Cumming is going to start working with Tim Quilty, David Limbrick, and those of us who want to see a return to sanity, then I think we should welcome that, regardless of how she's voted in the past. Okay, have I heard of the 2 children dying after they had vaccines in New South Wales? This is a rumor that's going around. The number now, I think, is supposedly 3 children who died after the 24,000 not HSC, it's not HSC up in New South Wales. Or is it? Yeah, it's VCE here, it's HSC up there. Anyway, year 12 students, 24,000 of them were sort of herded into a stadium and vaccinated. The rumor is, which I cannot confirm, and I do not have any information confirming, is that 3 of those children have since died, presumably as a reaction to the vaccine. And that came out and was supposedly reported by a ex-Air Force officer who was quoted on American sort of new media, but didn't really give a source for how he knew, or give an explanation for how he claims to know that information. And 1 or 2 others have since come out and agreed with that information, but I still haven't seen an actual source for it. So I remain very hands-off with that particular information. I don't know. It sucks to be right early. Thumbs up. Yes, unfortunately. Welcome to my life. Anyway, this isn't about me. Let me move on. Denmark looks good. Look, there's some things about Denmark and what they're doing that are good, but yeah, I mean, think about it. I mean, they're extremely high tax, Denmark. Do you really want that? You can go to the Caribbean. No vaccine mandates. Very, very laissez-faire attitude towards policing, and very low taxes. And it's the Caribbean. I don't know. People traveling through Europe without being vaccinated. Absolutely. I've got friends. I've been joking with them and threatening to block them on my Facebook, because I've got friends traveling through Europe right now and putting up travel photos, and it's just pissing me off. Yeah, without vaccines. And the same in the US. There's certain states you can't go to without a vaccine, but there's lots of places. There's lots of places where you can. So Craig is saying, don't tell us where you're going, but give us some ideas. I'll tell you where I'm going. As soon as we can get out of Australia, my family, we're going to spend a couple of months on holiday in the Caribbean. We're going to travel around, check the place out, see if we like it. If we do, then good. If we don't, we're going to check out Central America, Mexico and Colombia being the number 1 and number 2 there. And once Venezuela manages to get rid of the dictatorship they have there, I would love to go and get involved. I've got some friends there, and I want to get involved financially and basically fund their businesses, because Venezuela, it used to be in the top 10 wealthiest countries in the world. Now it's in the bottom few. And once they get rid of their socialist government, then they are going to rise really quickly. So it'd be a great place to invest. And I'd love to already be able to speak Spanish and understand the culture and so forth, to be able to invest there when they throw off their dictatorship and start rising. Okay. Oh, yeah, it just jumped again. Sorry, it does that to me, and then there we go. Okay, that's where I was. Have I heard about the farmers being paid in the US, being paid to destroy their crops? Not being paid, I haven't heard about that, but I do know that there's a number of primary producers around the world that have had to destroy their crops. For example, because whether it's beef cattle or what have you, the abattoirs were shut down and they had nowhere to take them. People who couldn't get pickers for their orchards, and it just rotted on the vines or on the trees, that sort of thing. I've heard a lot about that sort of thing. I haven't heard so much about anyone being paid to do it. Maybe it's happened. I haven't heard about it. Cousin has just arrived home from Holland. They have a 60% vaccination rate, no lockdowns, and they're wondering what the fuck we're doing with our lockdowns. Yeah, I'm wondering what the fuck we're doing with our lockdowns. I think we all are. Okay. Do I think there's a long-term agenda at play, or are we seeing unscrupulous people politicizing the virus and taking advantage of fearful citizens? I think it's both. There are unscrupulous people, and the UN is a prime example of this. There are unscrupulous people who have long-term plans, and there are things that they want to do, and they've been quite public about that. Not ages ago, I don't know, a couple of months ago, I posted an interview between Russell Brand and what's his name, whistleblower, who's had to, Edward Snowden. Now, I'm not a huge fan of Russell Brand's, but I think he's a classic case of someone who correctly diagnoses the problem and then prescribes exactly the wrong solution. But in this particular case, I thought it was a very, very good interview, and they made some really good points. And one of Edward Snowden's key points was the real conspiracies that are happening, they're not happening in the basements of pizza parlors or deep in the woods of some backwoods in the US where they're sacrificing children or any of that kind of crap, right? They're happening in plain sight. And the UN, for example, the Great Reset, okay, that's not a conspiracy theory. They're literally having a conference and standing up there and saying, this is what we are calling the Great Reset, and this is what we would like to do, right? Well, that's not a conspiracy theory. There are a bunch of people in the UN and in various positions of World Economic Forum, in various positions of power and influence, who are sitting there saying, this is our vision for the world. This is what we would like to give to you all to make the world a better place. So there's definitely those people. They exist. They're literally screaming from the rooftops, holding conferences that are televised and that are available online, where they're having speeches telling us about what their long-term plans are. So there are definitely long-term agendas at play. Are they these long-term agendas where they're the puppet masters and all the politicians are on the end of their string? No, I don't think so. Right. And that's where the other side of it, the unscrupulous people politicizing the virus, and then the politicians taking advantage of the fearful citizens. All of those things are happening at once. And that's where it can get really hard. And that's where I can sympathize with people that take the view that it's all this big evil masterminded plan. I can see how you arrive at that conclusion, because there are people out there saying, hey, this is what we want to do with society. Those people exist. Do they have the amount of power to pull off a crime like this? Well, no, not without the aid of useful idiots who are opportunists, and they politicize things and they take advantage of things. And look at the nexus between the media and politicians. Okay, there's this virus. The media are looking for a headline, so they want to talk about it in the most fearful terms possible. There's these headlines about this virus. The politicians are always looking for ways to make themselves seem like the hero, and they see all these headlines and they see people reacting in fear, and they go, "Hey, we have a solution!" Right? These perverse incentives kind of colliding and overlapping with each other that gets layered on top of the small number of people that do have long-term agendas at play, but they wouldn't be able to achieve them if it weren't for these other people feeding off that. So I think it's actually both. And the number one thing we need to do is break the fear. That's the number one thing that we need to do, because once the fear goes, everything falls apart. And attacking the fear of this virus is really what I've kind of been focused on the whole way through. And my message has consistently been, there is a better way. There is a better way to manage this thing. We protect the vulnerable. We protect the elderly and those with comorbidities that want to be protected. Nothing should be mandatory. I know of plenty of people in palliative care or who are elderly who have no interest in being cut off from their family. They would rather risk the coronavirus, but be with their families for their last months, weeks, maybe years, whatever it may be in their case, than to be protected from the coronavirus and alone. So we protect those who want to be protected, who are in a vulnerable category, and then we let the rest of us go free. That's been my message since March 2020. And the more time passes, I think the more evidence stacks up in favor of that particular strategy. Okay. If we aren't comfortable to do protests down in the city, what else do you recommend? There is safety in numbers. So if you can get to the protests in the city, I think that's probably a good idea, because protesting in very small numbers in a regional center or something makes you very vulnerable to getting picked off. They don't need a huge number of police resources if there's only 20 or 30 or 40 of you there. The very first protest that I did was on Anzac Day 2020, and it was down out in the southeast of Melbourne, out in a town. We had about 70 people there. Thankfully, the police chose to leave us alone. They were all there waiting for us, and then they actually left, and we were able to finish the protest in peace, which was nice, and in stark contrast to everything that's happened since. But I think time has moved on since then, and the police are much more aggressive. And if we were to try and pull off a similar thing now with only 70 people, we could expect a pretty aggressive police response. So if you're in a regional area and you can't make it to the big sort of city protests, I would say probably signs in windows signs on cars, those sorts of things. It's pretty hard for the police to tell you that you're not allowed to do that. Under what public health order are you not allowed to have a sign in your front yard or a sign in your front window or on your car or what have you? That's probably the approach that I would take under those circumstances. Angry young men are great. Stop trying to control people. Kind of ironic coming from a libertarian. I'm not trying to control people. I'm not pretending that I can control them. I'm just trying to give advice to those that voluntarily sit here and want to hear it. I think that's libertarianism in action. It is voluntary cooperation. I think that's the very essence of libertarianism. Topher, if you leave, won't the place you go to be almost the same? In fact, worse, as it's not your stomping ground and you have less say or right to resist. Yes and no. There is this perception, there's this really arrogant perception that the Western world, the Anglosphere, has that we're the best. And there's nowhere else in the world that's as free as us and as prosperous as us and as happy as us and blah, blah, blah. Bullshit. Okay? You talk to a Russian and they'll tell you that Russia's the best. You talk to a North Korean, they'll tell you that North Korea is the best. You talk to a Colombian, they'll tell you that Colombia is the best. Okay? Just because we think it doesn't mean it's true. There are enormous parts of the world that have a lot more freedom than we do. The Western civilization may have been the birthplace of modern freedom as we have it today. Obviously, it has existed in various forms in the past to varying degrees for the Greeks and Romans and other people at various moments in history. But the modern expression of that was born in the West. I think internationally we've become like, you think about a movie where they've got a whole bunch of like teenagers or whatever, and there's always that trust fund, spoiled brat, arrogant up himself asshole. And I think that's what the Western world is today. We are the trust fund babies. We are living off the prosperity that was earned for us by our ancestors who did the hard yards. We've become lazy, we've become arrogant, and we think we're the best, and we are far from it. That's my opinion. Now, I say that in the context of loving Melbourne and loving Australia. I like it here. Okay, this is my home. It is my stomping ground, as you say. So I like it here, but am I going to sit here and go, oh, the rest of the world's going to be worse? Well, no, I think that's an incredibly presumptuous and arrogant thing to say, and not borne out by reality if you look around. I would add to that, though, the nomad capitalist approach. So I'd recommend spending some time at nomadcapitalist.com. It's a guy called Andrew Henderson. I've been following him for a number of years. And the idea with him and what attracted me to his philosophy is it's not about taking your entire life out of where you are and then planting your entire life into another place. It's about distributing your life. So where your business is registered, where your bank accounts are, which passport you hold, where you are resident, the country that you live in, and where you invest, where you use your money to try and make more money, can be 5 different places. They don't have to be the same country. And if you actually select each one based on which one suits you best, then you can have bank accounts with banks that are more secure than Australian banks. You can live in a place where you get more personal freedom than you do in Australia on a day-to-day basis in terms of just that niggling continuous nanny state that we have here in Australia. That doesn't exist in most of the world. If you're living there as a resident on a residence visa rather than as a passport holder, they treat you differently, right? Countries tend to treat their passport holders, their citizens, very, very poorly because they feel like they own you. But if you're a resident and you have someone else's passport, you can leave at any time. They kind of don't hassle you as much. They don't treat you quite as badly, mostly. And so if you're living in one place, but you're living there on a passport from another country, you actually often have more freedom. And even if they had actually shut you down, like if you're in Australia on someone else's passport, you can leave right now. It's only if you're on an Australian passport that they're locking you in, right? Just as a single example of that. So actually diversifying your life, spreading your sovereign risk. I've gone into that in previous slow chats. I'm not going to go deeply into that today, but spreading your sovereign risk is the focus. Okay. Do I think that some news like Sky have made a deal with someone from the government? They've seemed to change their narrative and started to really push the vaccine. I don't think they so much made a deal with someone in the government. I think that someone senior in Sky is all about the vaccines and they don't want to be associated with the anti-vaxxer crazy fringe crowd. And hence that's where the push has come from. A lot of people immediately assume that there's a conspiracy, that there's some sort of backroom deals and that sort of stuff. No, it's usually perverse incentives, human arrogance, ignorance. These are usually the drivers of these sorts of decisions. And I would suggest human arrogance and perverse incentives are the case in the case of Sky. They're already kind of the outsiders. They're not really accepted in the club of mainstream TV. And so they've looked at it and gone, oh gosh, if we associate with this anti-vaxxer crowd, then we're going to be off with the fairies. We're never going to be accepted into the club. We want to be accepted into the club. So how about we just go really hard on the vaccines and maybe they'll accept us, which of course never works out that way. But that's what I would suggest is probably more the cause, but I'm speculating. I don't know. Michaela's saying, I attended the first time on Saturday. I enjoyed it. Families and children make others feel free to stay, to say that they are family friendly. Yep, that's a fair point. My first protest in Berlin was a relief. What do you think of a silent protest? I think any type of protest, if you can make it work, is good. Yeah, if you can make it work, good, go for it. Irene saying, I came alone and it helped as I've been feeling very alone. That is one of the nice things about the protests is there is actually a feeling of community and a feeling of you're not crazy. That gaslighting that I talked about before kind of gets broken when you're there and you're like, hang on, there's all these people, they're normal people. I could hang out with these people. I could have a barbecue with these people. I feel like I could be friends with these people. And it really helps with that sort of loneliness. Bruno is suggesting that we comment on politicians' Facebook pages, reminding them of how little they've lost and those who are protesting have nothing left to lose. I agree, except that politicians don't read their own Facebook pages. You're better off sending emails. Emails usually don't get read by the politicians themselves, but they're more likely to filter through and actually get through to the politician themselves. But posting on a Facebook page is not a bad idea. Other people see it, so it's not a bad idea. Could I name a few Plan B locations that I have my eye on? Starting in the Caribbean, then Central America, and if I don't like either of those places, I'm going to look at Eastern Europe. Hungary, Czech Republic had some really good stuff going on, but now they've kind of gone full lockdowns and stuff. Latvia, a couple of other places in Eastern Europe, Andorra, in between France and Spain. There's a number of places. Mikaru says, what's the podcast? I'm assuming that's the podcast that I'll be on Thursday morning. I don't know the name of it off the top of my head. I will, however, be trying to live stream it onto my page simultaneously. And if I can't do that, I'll be getting the video and uploading it later on. Social distancing rule is preventing. Yeah, this is one of my concerns. Social distancing rule is preventing children from building up natural herd immunity to many diseases. Social distancing kills a lot more than COVID-19. I agree. And I was saying this literally last year before winter. I was in March or April. I first started articulating my concern that we're actually weakening our natural immunity against all of these other things. Our immunity against the common cold depends on us being regularly exposed to small amounts of the common cold. It's kind of like an update. It's how our immune system stays up to date. And all of these masks and social distancing and everything else, if it works, it's actually doing harm to our immune system. And if it doesn't work, then we shouldn't be doing it in the first place. So no matter which way you stand on masks and whatever else, it still doesn't make sense. Do flares have a place at a protest? In my personal opinion, no. I've never brought flares to a protest. I've never felt the need to bring flares to a protest. I certainly, if I had flares with me magically at a protest, I wouldn't use them. I don't think so. But it's the hive mind. There are people who bring them and want to bring them, and there's no central control, and no one can really control that or stop that. If someone asked me at the time, hey, I've got a flare, shall I light it off? I'd say, well, buddy, I'd rather you didn't, right? Okay, so there's a lot of comments that are obviously comments back and forth between other people. Is one protest of 8,000 better than 80 separate at the same time in different places with, say, 500 people? In my opinion, yes. Although if you could have a protest of 8,000 and then a bunch of other protests with 500 people at the same time, that would be great too. But again, just because of the police resources, they can't really control a crowd of 8,000 people, even with all of their resources concentrated. It's just not something they can do. Whereas a protest of 500 people, we've seen that. We've seen how that ends up. It ends up with being kettled, everyone being fined, and so forth. So why not both? Why not both? Yeah, so you'll own nothing and you'll be happy by Klaus Schwab, fair enough. Klaus Schwab from the World Economic Forum. This is part of that whole, I was commenting before, there are people that have plans for humanity and they want their vision of humanity to be rolled out around the world and everyone must comply. And Klaus Schwab is a classic example of that. They want to lock us down, confiscate our property and then rent it to us. Yeah. Which is it is communism. It's full communism. They own everything, and we just have to do as we're told, work the jobs that we're given, and accept whatever we're given in return for that. Oh, goodness. Graham says, any prediction on how much longer the lockdown will go? No, mate. Sorry, I cannot read the mind of a madman. I don't know what Daniel Andrews is thinking. Okay. I'm loving these trolls. Like, seriously, you guys have given me a couple of 100 comments just yourselves tonight. It's fantastic. Titles office. Am I jabbed? No, I'm not. Let me talk about my position on the vaccine. I'm not anti-vax at all. I've been vaccinated many, many times. I did not question vaccines at all until my younger sister was given her triple antigen, the measles, mumps, rubella. She's 13 years younger than me, so I was a teenager at the time, and I remember it all moderately well. She had a massive reaction that night. My dad, she would have died. My dad got up to go to the toilet and walked past her cot and actually reached in and kind of touched her and realized all of her sheets and blankets were just completely soaked. Touched herself and realized she'd completely dried out. She was pale. She'd lost all the color in her skin. She wasn't responding or waking up when he tried to wake her up. He bundled her into the car and headed for the hospital. I'm not entirely clear about what happened in the hospital. My understanding is they brought her in. They were basically told to piss off. There's nothing wrong. Sometimes kids have a little bit of a reaction after a vaccine. It's not a problem. And he actually headed for the car, and then a nurse came out from the hospital looking for them, someone who's obviously a bit more clued in, and actually brought them back in. And a triage nurse or a more senior nurse or someone brought them back in. I'm a bit fuzzy on the details. And what I do know is what my mum has said many times, that when she got back in with my younger sister, the call that she put out on the intercom was, for whatever code, whatever, and then said, "We've got a flat baby here." Basically, no pulse, no signs of life. All is well that ends well. The hospital staff did an amazing job, and they brought her back. And she's alive and she's with us today. No ill effects that we can discern. That happens. I've got to say, any medication, any medicine, any surgery, and there's always a risk of something going wrong. But the real concerning thing, and the thing that was really jarring for my entire family, because up to that point in time, we were 100% pro-vax. It was all about, yeah, of course, you get the vaccine. You don't want to get the disease, so you get the vaccine. Was that when my mum tried to ask any kind of question about whether this could possibly have been related to the triple antigen that she'd had earlier that day, she was mocked. She wasn't given a reasonable, oh no, look, there's studies have been done and we're quite sure it's not blah, blah, blah. No. She was mocked. She was derided for even thinking that there could have been a link. And that was really jarring for her, because that kind of a response has no place in medicine. It has no place in any kind of scientific or data-driven endeavor. You look at the data and you go, okay, what are the possible causes of this thing? Let's rule them out one by one. And I would have accepted if they'd looked into it and they'd come up and said, actually, no, this was this other reaction caused by this other thing, or this was some unrelated thing, whatever. I would have accepted that, but I don't accept them not even looking into it. And that was really jarring for me, for my family, and started a chain of events that I guess in a way have kind of led much later in life to me being sort of who I am today, and being fairly cynical of a lot of supposed authorities today. I've had vaccines since then. I was in the Army Reserve. They jab you in the shoulder with all sorts of stuff. They barely even tell you what it is. I'm not at all anti-vaccine. However, in the case of these particular vaccines, this is not just a new vaccine. This is an entirely new technology. And I want to talk, look, let me go down this rabbit hole for a second. This is not just, so a normal vaccine, what it does is they inject into your body the thing that your immune system is supposed to fight. So it's usually either a killed version of the virus. They take the virus, they kill it, so it's not active anymore, but your immune system will still respond. Or it's alive attenuated, so it's still alive, but they've removed the bit that actually does you damage, but your body will still fight it, and it will learn from that, and it will be able to fight the real disease in future. So live attenuated or killed, and there's a few other varieties as well. But they inject the actual thing that your body is supposed to fight into your body. Your immune system reacts, it fights it, and then you have immunity, depending on the vaccination, sometimes for the rest of your life. Other times it wanes over time. But by and large, most those technologies have been around now for decades. And whilst I do suspect that the adverse reaction rate is much higher than what is officially reported, based on what happened with my sister and the fact that her reaction was never even investigated as a possible adverse reaction, I do suspect that the adverse reaction rates that we have for ordinary vaccines are considerably lower than what's happening in reality. However, history tells us that they are reasonably safe. I mean, if there were literally millions of people dropping dead from these things all the time, we would have noticed by now. With these new vaccines, what they actually do is they don't inject into you the thing that your body is supposed to fight. They inject into your body instructions so that your body manufactures the thing that your body is supposed to fight. And that adds another entire layer to the process and another step where things can perhaps not quite go as intended. So one of the things that I'm hearing from the experts now as they're looking at the data is they're seeing evidence that different people's bodies respond in very different ways to these instructions. Some people's bodies don't produce a lot of these spike proteins, which is what, your body is supposed to produce the spike proteins. Your immune system then fights the spike proteins. It develops that immunity. That's how it's supposed to work. But different people's responses to these instructions, these mRNA lipid capsules that they're injecting into your body, some people respond very strongly to those and produce a lot of spike proteins, potentially leading to these blood clots and other heart problems and so forth that we are seeing. And other people's bodies really don't produce very much at all. And so we've lost control over the size of the dose. A traditional vaccine, the dose is controlled. It is whatever is in that syringe. In this particular type of vaccine, the dose is actually not particularly controlled in the same way. And being an entirely new technology, we don't know what we don't know. No one can tell you that these are safe over the long term. Why? Because no one's had them over the long term. It hasn't happened yet. Now, hundreds of millions of people have now had the jabs. So we're starting to get a handle on what the short-term safety looks like. But absolutely nobody knows what the long-term safety looks like. We're also seeing increasingly that they're not particularly effective. So there's lots of conjecture over whether they're safe or not. I'm not really going to buy into that because a lot of the data that's supposedly being thrown around can't be verified. Okay, there's the VAERS data and other stuff that can be verified, but a death after a vaccine isn't necessarily a death from a vaccine, just like a death after COVID isn't necessarily a death from COVID. So even with their data, you can't just grab their numbers and go, see, this many people were killed by a vaccine. It's not that simple. But putting aside safety and just looking at effectiveness, I touched on earlier, Gibraltar, Israel, Iceland, and many other countries, they have 80+% adult vaccination rates, and yet they're having outbreaks of the Delta variant far in excess of anything that we've had in Australia up to this point in time. So how effective are they really? The evidence is starting to stack up, suggesting that they're not particularly effective. So for both of those reasons, we don't know what the long-term safety is, and they're not particularly effective in the short term. We are learning that very, very quickly. I'm not jabbed. Am I part of the vaccine experiment? Yes, I am, but I'm in the control group. Right? Every proper scientific medical study has to have the subject group and the control group. I'm in the control group of the vaccine experiment, and we'll see what the data says in future. We'll see what comes out as time goes on. I cannot rule out that I may very well take these in future at some point in time. Okay, I'm not ruling that out. I'm not ready to take them now, and I'm certainly not going to give them to any member of my family or any of my kids when there's just so much that we don't know. Okay. Yeah, so this is interesting. Actually, this is a good point, Nick. Thank you for pulling me up on this. I said before that I hadn't been able to verify that any students had died after the 24,000 Year 12 students in New South Wales were vaccinated. And there's these reports coming out that 3 kids have died. And I did say I haven't been able to verify anything. You're absolutely right, Nick. There was a college, St. Pius apparently, in Chatswood, that posted about one of their Year 11 students who suffered a heart attack and died. And that would be very consistent with the reaction to these vaccines. We know that heart issues are one of the key adverse reactions that can happen. So that would seem to be a prime candidate that would tend to support the idea that those reports are actually true. So thank you, Nick, for pulling me up on that. I had actually forgotten about that, even though I did see it. I'd forgotten about that, so thank you. Topher, are you speaking to many people or families that have absolutely nothing left? Yeah. One of the less pleasant, I guess, realities of having a little bit of profile is people want to tell their story and they're not being listened to in the mainstream media, and they reach out to me, and I'm more than happy. If you need someone to reach out to, please, I would rather you reached out to me than reached out to nobody. Okay. But yes, there's a lot of stories. There's a lot of people who are hurting in a really, really big way. Unfortunately, in practical reality, there's not much I can do for them apart from what I'm already doing, which is just continuing to chip away and hope that eventually we turn the tide of this. And When will that happen? I don't know. But yeah, if you're aware of people in your life that are struggling, please reach out to them. Or even if you're not aware, just check in with people. But yes, unfortunately, there is a lot of heartache out there. My mate in the USA say that they are opening up because they've reached a 50% vaccination target. Why is our target so high? Because it's all about politics. If we hit a 50% target and we opened up, we would have massive case rates, which would then completely invalidate everything that they've been telling us so far. So politically speaking, they were hoping that 80% would be high enough that they wouldn't have big outbreaks. And it turns out that the vaccines aren't very effective. And so even with 99% vaccination rates, they do get big outbreaks. So unfortunately, what we're seeing now, and I posted an article about this earlier today, we're seeing now they're changing the narrative yet again. At 80%, we're not going to open up. At 80%, we're still going to have restrictions and masks and limits on the number of people and all that sort of stuff. So they're just constantly moving the goalposts because they cannot admit that they got it wrong in the first place. The only way this ends is when we force it to end. And that's protests, and that's raising our voices, getting active politically, all that sort of stuff. That's how it ends. The main part is still greed. This is talking about why people are doing what they're doing, I assume. Implementing a new vaccine for corona, just like the flu. Besides that, pharma can do experiments on us that they dreamed of with vector and mRNA. Yeah, to a degree, I think that's absolutely true. I mean, we're seeing with this talk of booster shots, oh, you'll need a third shot. And, oh, you might need a shot every 6 months. You might need a shot every year. They're turning us into a subscription model. You know, your antivirus needs to be updated like your computer kind of idea. I mean, that's a brilliant business model. That's a brilliant business model. I mean, how much money are they going to make out of that? But at the same time, that doesn't necessarily automatically mean they're going to win and get what they want. How do I find out what India is using? I'm going to assume that you're talking about ivermectin, the triple therapy. I would suggest Googling Dr. Thomas Borody, Borody. And if you follow your nose there, sooner or later, you'll eventually find his recommended triple therapy, which is available on the internet if you know where to look. Not hard to find. Whether it gets past customs is another matter altogether. Michael just talking about Plan B. A lot of the Caribbean is run via the UK or the EU. That's true, but it just in actual practice, you living there on the ground, you get left alone. Right. And if you split your life up and you don't put your entire life into one basket, as I was saying before, and I would recommend people look at the Nomad Capitalist, nomadcapitalist.com for information on that, then if the country you're living in goes in a direction you don't like, it's not that big a deal to change because it's not like your bank accounts or where your business is registered or where your passport is or any of that sort of stuff. It's not like any of that has to be moved. You just have to move house, literally. Okay, at what point will Vic Labor MPs turn on Andrews? It won't happen, and then it will happen all at once. It's the same analogy I gave before about the dam bursting. Everything will be fine. They'll all come out in press conferences. Yes, we're all supporting each other. Yes, this is the right way to go, blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden, the dam will burst. They will all turn, and they will all be scrambling like rats to get off the sinking ship as fast as possible. When will that happen? No idea. What do I think about Craig Kelly becoming the candidate for the United Australia Party? Is that something that's announced, or is that a speculative question? I've not heard anything about that. Do I say this or not? Yeah, I'll say this. It is looking extremely likely, although not 100% confirmed yet, that I will have Craig Kelly joining me for Thursday's Slow Chat. And he and I will be having a nice long chat over a cigar and a drink on Thursday night starting at 8 p.m. right here where you are right now. So that is something to look forward to if you enjoy Craig Kelly and what he's been saying. Yeah, so Al is saying protesters are supposed to be protected by the Constitution. Why aren't police and government taking notice of their Constitution? Because they think they're above the law. the law doesn't actually apply anymore. Think about it. Daniel Andrews is no longer ruling through the parliament. He's completely suspended the parliament. They're not actually functioning anymore. So we've lost our representation. Judges and the judicial system are simply rubber stamping everything that Daniel Andrews wants to do. So our judicial system and the accountability that they're supposed to bring is no longer functioning anymore. We have Daniel Andrews dictating with a small cabal of hand-picked individuals, some of whom were elected, some of whom were not even elected. They didn't have to go through that process. We are essentially a medical dictatorship. That's what we are now. And under those circumstances, who cares what the Constitution says? Who cares what the Bill of Rights and Responsibilities says? Who cares what the law says? He's basically putting it on us to have to fight him in court and prove him wrong. And that's going to take years and amounts of money that most of us don't have. So you're absolutely right. But unfortunately, what do you do? Scott is saying, I spent January 2020 in Vietnam, far more freedom than Australia. In terms of practical day-to-day living, yes. I personally wouldn't want to live there long-term because there's lots of other issues with Vietnam. But in terms of actually just day-to-day, you get left alone. And that is more than can be said for Australia right now. Yeah, this is something I'm concerned about. Those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable. This is really concerning. If your elected representatives are no longer able to represent you, if you can no longer get recourse in the courts, and you can no longer even go through that process, what peaceful means and mechanisms are left for you, especially if they start cracking down violently on protests? That has the potential to lead to a really ugly place. I don't want us to go there. I really don't. However, those who make peaceful revolution impossible, people start looking for alternatives. All right, well, guys, you guys are commenting faster than I can actually catch up. So I'm scrolling through, and I'm not even getting closer to the bottom of all of the comments. So I'm going to call it there. 2 hours and 10 minutes. I think that's enough. You guys spend some time with your family. I'm going to do the same thing. But look, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I hope that the first half of this, all about protests and all about how do you kind of approach them and be able to get in and get out again with minimal risk. I hope that was helpful. I hope that's given some of you some courage to be able to join us at any future ones. And the second half of the Q&A, well, I hope that that's at least been somewhat interesting to you guys. I appreciate all the questions. I'm sorry I couldn't keep up. I honestly thank you for all the questions and for all the comments and the thoughts. I do appreciate it, but I literally couldn't keep up. Let me scroll back and get rid of that one. So thank you. Thank you very, very much. I'm Topher Field. You can find my blog at topherfield.net, my Facebook page at Topher Field. I'm going to have to get active on Twitter, and I'm actually about to start an Instagram because the people that want to get me onto a podcast from the US, they do it on Instagram, and I hate Instagram, and I don't have one. Now I have to have one. So soon you'll be able to follow me on Instagram as well. And I have just recently started a thing called Subscribe Star. So the website is subscribestar.com/Topher Field. It's like a Patreon, but without all the censorship and all the other nonsense that goes with them. So if you appreciate what I do, the slow chats, all the videos that I do, the content that I post on Facebook, and you would like to help me continue doing it and do more of it, then I would be very, very grateful for that. Obviously, there's no obligation, and you need to look after yourself first. So if you're in a position where you're struggling, please don't chip in to me, okay? Look after yourself, look after your family first. But if you're in a position where you can and you would like to and help me to kind of justify the hours and the time that goes into what I do and to potentially do more of it, then I'd be very grateful. So check out that subscribestar.com/Topher Field. I think about 14 people have jumped on so far, and I do appreciate that. And as more people jump on, I'm going to be able to spend more and more time doing what I do and start to spend a bit more money on some of the things, maybe upgrading some equipment in the not too distant future and a bit of stuff like that I haven't been able to justify up to this point in time. So I'm grateful to everyone that has done that. I'm grateful to everyone that may do that in the future. And for those of you that can't or choose not to, it's completely fine. Please continue to come along, enjoy the content that I produce, like, share, comment, ask questions, all that sort of stuff. It's fantastic, and I really appreciate it. And if you do want to be on my email list so I can stay in touch with you if I get taken off Facebook, then go to topherfield.net, and on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll find somewhere you can put in your email address and join my email list that way as well. So thank you very much. Tonight's been good fun for me. I'm actually losing my voice now. I trust that you've had a great night, and go and hug your families and get a good night's sleep, and try and enjoy yourself as much as you can in these ridiculous, crazy times. Do something that makes you happy. Try and find something, whatever it is, that makes you happy every single day, and we'll get through this and get out the other side. Thanks very much.